You left the boy in charge of a man's work.
You should thank the man that is my friend.
Your war is lost.
They are everywhere.
Count to 4. Inhale.
1, 2, 3. Hey, Nazis are weird, right? How weird are they, you ask? Well, we're going to talk about moon people, cosmic ice theories, and the occult, but for now, let's just zoom in on this. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazi SS, claimed that babies who were conceived in Aryan cemeteries would grow strong because they'd be filled with the ancestral spirits of the dead heroes who were buried there. He went as far as to publish a list of suitable cemeteries in Dashfart's Corpse, an SS magazine. Few series understand this better than Wolfenstein. Even before Machine Games took over the franchise and injected it with metal behemoths and barely inconvenient beheadings, these games wallowed in Nazi weirdness. Resurrections, superpowers, Mecha Hitler. At the risk of sounding overly serious, it's important not to lose sight of that. Nazis are weird. Their evil was structured to seem banal and clinical, but their philosophy was built on insane foundations. Ancient races hallucinated by a con artist, map dowsing for naval battles. To quote Michael Fitzgerald in his book, The Nazis and the Supernatural, "It would not be true to describe Nazi Germany as a state primarily governed on occult principles. But the 12 years during which the Nazi Party ruled Germany and much of Europe were so fundamentally governed by irrational and magical thinking that the whole period has sometimes been referred to as the Occult Reich." As a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to say with a straight face that the Nazis were backed by the supernatural or that the occult explains how it rose to power. There's a clear, traceable toppling of socio-political dominoes in Germany's history. Dominoes that became fertile ground for the Nazis to exploit. But Nazism is full of magical thinking that pretends to be scientific. And the deeper the rabbit hole goes, the weirder it gets. Wolfenstein: The New Order understands this completely. It coats itself in a science fiction aesthetic. It puts the Weird Reich at the center of its world, writing, and Nazi killing, so that is what we're going to talk about here. This video will follow a similar structure to when I covered Bioshock, Soma, and System Shock, exploring the New Order as a game, but also breaking down its real-world inspirations and philosophies. Where does Death's Head's vision of a master race even come from? How does the occult factor into it? And how effective is mockery in the face of fascism? Grab your Luger and settle in. This is a commentary, critique, and historical analysis of Wolfenstein: The New Order. B.J. Blazkowicz exists to prove this man, Otto Weininger, wrong. Described by Hitler as the only decent Jew, Weininger was a self-hating anti-Semite who, in his essay Sex and Character, split nations and races into two camps: active or passive. German Aryans, he argued, were drivers of action, spiritual, moral, masculine, while Jews were incapable of touching any of it. B.J. Blazkowicz is Jewish. While that wasn't textual until this game's sequel, the characterization goes right back to Wolfenstein 3D. In 2014, months before the New Order released, BJ's original designer, Tom Hall, said, "My intent was, his mother was Jewish, tried to hide that unsuccessfully." If Weininger played Wolfenstein, its hero would give him a heart attack. BJ looks like the perfect Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, chisel-jawed, guided by righteousness, but he's Jewish. How can that be? Nazi ideology is defined by contradiction. The joke goes that the ideal Aryan should be blonde like Hitler, tall like Goebbels, and slim like Göring. But that obsession with appearance came later. In Weininger's day, one psychological trait supposedly defined an Aryan: willpower, something BJ has in spades. Just look at where he is when the game opens.
You're still breathing, you jammy bastard. You're tough as they come, you know. Jesus Christ.
It's 1946 and the Nazis are winning. The Allies were beaten back at Normandy by new technologies harnessed by the Weird Reich, and this is the last gasp to pull everything back from the brink. A frontal assault on the headquarters of Death's Head, mastermind of the Nazi war machine. BJ, RAF Wing Commander Fergus Reed, and the naive Private Wyatt are throwing everything at a mission that runs on a hope and a prayer. Weininger's Aryan is a spiritual man, and how Machine Games applies that spirituality to BJ is one of its greatest successes. He's not religious, his heritage is Jewish, not his belief, but he waxes philosophical constantly. He mows down Nazis while spouting poetry. He finds a skull and quotes Hamlet. He describes the assault not as war, but as the breaking of the seals, the undoing of life itself. That introspection is how he stays focused. With a gun in his hand and blood in his teeth, BJ is a Nazi-killing maniac, but one who channels his energy so his willpower keeps the spotlight. Death howls his name at the gates again, but he can't greet it today. He's got a war to win. In another life, he'd be a poet. Brian Bloom's portrayal is what makes it work. Evolving BJ from a badass meathead into a quiet, dangerous romantic could have come off as try-hard, a worry the game's director and lead writer, Jens Mattis, had from the start. The fix was to double down. They dimmed the lights in the sound booth, and because these were BJ's inner thoughts, Bloom cut the physicality and hushed the words. The result is a roving philosopher who shouts with his fists, not his mouth.
To commission a portrait in service of your ego, General, you waste your paint.
He believes in killing Nazis. Other thoughts and questions branch off later, but that is his church. The end of fascism is his moral compass, a morality so deeply ingrained that it again flies in the face of how this ideology views his race. Weininger believed that Jews weren't driven by ethics, and that's not even where the weirdness begins. In its earliest form, that ideology rested on something far stranger than a racial checklist. The race soul. The belief that blood, literally, biologically, carried spiritual properties, and that your ancestry shaped not just your appearance, but your inner life. So, let's forget Weininger, he's barely a prelude. Let's meet some new faces.
Which one of these two varieties would best support my research?
SS Oberstgruppenführer Wilhelm Strass, aka Death's Head, is the game's villain, and an old name for longtime fans. He first appeared and returned to Castle Wolfenstein, the first FPS I ever finished, despite being a Medal of Honor household. On the upper floors of his castle, he captures BJ, Fergus, and Wyatt. He recognizes BJ and marvels at how alike their names are, Wilhelm and William, hinting at a false kinship. Both Aryan specimens, both the master race. Right? Death's Head's cruelty isn't random, it's the logic of his ideology, where life's value is determined entirely by blood. To understand where that idea came from, you have to go back much further than Strass, and it's the bedrock of everything we're about to discuss, so stick with me. Nazis didn't invent their ideology from scratch. They inherited it, distorted it, and dressed it up as science. It's the product of a comical chain of misreadings, both deliberate and accidental. A catastrophic game of broken telephone. So, here's a question. Where does the word Aryan come from? Friedrich Max Müller was a 19th century linguist who, in 1853, introduced a term that would haunt him for the rest of his life. That term was Aryan. He used it for the Proto-Indo-European language family, the ancient root of Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, Persian, and most European languages. Its speakers he called Aryans. It was a linguistic designation, nothing more. He spent decades begging people to stop misquoting him, and nobody listened. Into that gap walked a Russian occultist with a lot of very big ideas. Can I interest you in three-eyed telepathic Atlanteans? In 1888, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky published a manuscript called The Secret Doctrine, a vast, sprawling work of occult cosmology that she claimed was ancient wisdom transmitted by spiritual masters in Tibet. Now, it's widely held that she plagiarized much of it, and even if she didn't, my Michael Gomes translation is littered with footnotes flagging how she uses occult terms differently from everyone else, but don't worry about that. The Secret Doctrine proposed that human history was the story of 7 root races, successive waves of humanity, each more spiritually evolved than the last. Our Earth was created or fashioned by terrestrial spirits, she writes. Secret teachings show the divine progenitors creating men on 7 portions of the globe, each on his lot. A different race of men externally and internally on different zones. Building on Müller, she used Aryan for the 5th root race, but she had no racial hierarchy in mind. No blonde hair, no blue eyes, no master race. She linked the root races back to the legendary city of Atlantis, and her superior ancient peoples with cyclopean eyes were about spiritual evolution, not biological destiny. What she had built was an architecture, a mythology of lost civilizations, superior ancient races, and hidden knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. And that architecture was waiting for someone to move in and redecorate. Enter Guido von List, an Austrian occultist and, crucially, godfather of the Thule Society, the organization the Nazis quite literally began as an arm of. Hitler studied under men List influenced directly. His fingerprints are all over what followed, and key figures like Rudolf Hess and Hans Frank became ranked members of the Nazi Party. List took Blavatsky's framework and Germanicized it. In The Religion of the Aryo-Germanic Folk, he wrote, "This knowledge-based faith is free of any doubt with regards to karma or destiny. It is so firmly rooted in the convictions of our forefathers that they referred to themselves as those with power over destiny, the Garmanen. We now see this as Germans." The root races became Norse and Germanic. Atlantis became a primordial Aryan homeland. He grafted Norse myth onto occult cosmology, and spirituality became ethnically coded. You either had it in your blood or you didn't. Blavatsky claimed that root races bred with animals to create subspecies of man. In the 1920s, List made the wild, unfounded claim that Aryan Germans were exempt from that. It was fiction that he called knowledge-based and free of any doubt, and it served an obvious purpose: rebuilding the German spirit after the humiliation of World War I. Your blood was your destiny. Your ancestry was your soul. At the risk of jumping too far ahead, we see this later when BJ gets stuck on a train with Frau Irene Engel, the game's second monster. She grabs him and, for the banter, forces him through a racial purity test.
Findest du nicht auch, Bobi?
Ja, mir gefallen seine Augen.
"I can spot an impure with my naked eye," she says. List's blood mysticism has been so thoroughly absorbed that she applies it casually as entertainment. The test is nonsense. Holiday photos, random pictures of spiders, but the tension holds on the first playthrough because we, as BJ, choose each picture. In the end, she decides that a Jew wouldn't have taken the test at all. He would have gone for the gun, which is an option. But the point stands. Engel is testing our psychology because she believes the psychology is tied to race. She subscribes wholeheartedly to the next name on our list. Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazi Party's chief ideologist and resident nutter. He took List's framework and systemized it into something that, if you squinted, almost looked like philosophy. He's the one who coined the race soul. In the myth of the 20th century, he wrote, "The life of a race, its people, is not a philosophically logical development. It is the formation of mystical synthesis, an activity of the soul which cannot be explained by rational deduction nor made intelligible through analyses of cause and effect." Myth sits alongside Mein Kampf as a primary Nazi text. We rarely hear about it now for two reasons. Hitler's book dwarfed it, and it's a rambling, sordid mess of over 500 pages that lurches from historical revisionism about Rome to ranting that the Norse tales of Balder and Siegfried are analogous to German soldiers in 1914. The only thing worse is the translator's commentary, courtesy of Nazi sympathizer and Holocaust denier Thomas Dalton. While Rosenberg insists that Jews possess no organic shape of the soul and therefore no racial shape, Dalton's footnotes froth about how the feats of Egypt trace back to Germans because Viking swan boats resemble Egyptian ships. I genuinely could have done anything else in my time. God damn it, Wolfenstein, this is all your fault! Rosenberg's claim is that blood carries spiritual properties. Your capacity for will, creativity, and moral feeling, all decided by ancestry. He sold this mystical fabrication as settled science. But remember where it came from. A single word lifted from a linguist who spent decades protesting the theft, filtered through a spiritualist writing about ancient telepaths, remolded by an occultist into a racially exclusive mythology, and then handed to the German people as fact. And this is what Death's Head is the product of, and what BJ Blazkowicz, just by existing, refutes. A Jewish man with the soul of a poet and superhuman will, about to spend the next 15 hours proving every one of them wrong. But first, he has to fail. This is an underdog story after all. With Death's Head's arrival, everything falls apart. BJ watches his team crushed and butchered, and as they try to escape, the fortress explodes. He's lost to smoke, debris, and the ocean.
Strange sensation. Trapped in my body. I black out. I'm losing time.
14 years pass. A family saves him and cares for him in their asylum, but the Nazis win the war and the world turns red, white, and black. As the Reich expands, BJ is trapped inside his own mind. His inner monologue is romantic, but it isn't forgiving. For 14 years, his days swing between the comfort of his nurse, Anya Olawa, and the rage that boils up when Nazis come to haul his fellow patients away. Both keep him alive. Anya heals his body and gives him hope that he'll one day tell her how he feels. The Fury fuels that all-important willpower. The Nazis insisted that very willpower that BJ runs on was exclusive to the Germanic race. Yet the game opens with him burned, shot, brutalized, hit by a plane twice, so feral in the face of fascism that he heals himself by cramming dog food down his throat. That is literal. Death's Head's fortress is dotted with bowls of kibble that top up your health. It sharpens the power fantasy. Every Nazi who remarks how Aryan he looks just before he guts them delivers a pulpy thrill. Simply by living, BJ undermines this ideology. All of it boils over when Death's Head's men storm the asylum and kill everyone, doctors and patients alike. BJ crashes back to the land of the living, saves Anya, and escapes in an explosive rampage, his blood-soaked hands front and center. I wonder what he dreamed of for 14 years. Maybe Castle Wolfenstein. Maybe a sponsorship. How's that for a transition? This video is sponsored by FlexiSpot. If you're gonna spend 8 hours a day staring at a screen, the least you can do is not kill your spine in the process. Thankfully, you can sink into FlexiSpot's C7 Morpher chair.
Can I sit in it?
No! As someone who already uses FlexiSpot stuff daily, this is perfect. The backrest has what they call Flex Lean Tech. It wraps your upper back and nudges forward slightly to keep you supported all day. It's one of the things that sets it apart. Most ergonomic chairs just leave your upper back to fend for itself. The lumbar support is air inflatable. You pump it to exactly the pressure that you want. It reclines all the way back, and as it does, the lumbar support moves with your spine. You're not just reclining into the void, you're supported the whole time. Take the 5D armrests. They recline with you, providing support for your arms at every angle. There's a 3D adjustable headrest, customizable seat depth, and upgraded mesh cushioning that they claim reduces hip pressure by 20%. I don't have a way to verify that, but to quote Shakira, my hips don't lie. They offer a 30-day risk-free trial, 10-year warranty, and are currently running up to 75% off site-wide. If you're in the US, Independence Day is coming up, so treat yourself by using my code C750 to get $50 off. Thanks again to FlexiSpot, and on with the video. The Old Blood is a standalone prequel to The New Order. It picks up 2 days before the assault on Death's Head, and while both the game and its expansion explore what the Nazis believed, this is where the supernatural returns to the series. Heinrich Himmler had a personal occultist. His name was Karl Williget, and he believed that German civilization dated back 228,000 years, to a time when the Earth had 3 suns and was populated by giants and dwarves. In Himmler's Secret Society, Erho von Gronhagen writes about his experience lodging with Williget. Quote, like so many great men, he was one after all, at least according to Himmler, Williget was in many ways like a child. If some minor detail did not go his way, he would get angry and sulk. This is from the time of the Goths, he would say, handing me a rock. Once, when I could see that his Gothic stone was clearly a chip off the stone fountain from a nearby construction site, I had no choice but to object. Williget was deeply hurt. The scientists have managed to poison your mind as well, he said bitterly. This stone is from the time of the Goths, because I say so. Williget designed the SS Death's Head ring, a silver skull that Wolfenstein's monster takes his name from. This man was real. He had a job title. The Old Blood is set in his world.
Stay focused, stay quiet, and follow me, right?
Commandant Franz, Aus Frankfurt. Guten Morgen, guten Morgen.
BJ and fellow spy Richard Wesley are off, undercover to Castle Wolfenstein. It's an occult research center run by Helga von Schabs. Rumor has it that she's got the coordinates to Death's Head's compound, but something else is brewing here. The Old Blood is not a remake of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, but Machine Games called it a reimagining and homage, and the connective tissue is real. We've got the same castle, returning characters, and the same occult foundations. It's returned to Castle Wolfenstein seen through the machine game's lens. Even then, if it is a reimagining, it only reimagines the first 2 missions of Return. BJ doesn't go to Egypt, he doesn't infiltrate Death's Head's X-Labs, and he doesn't confront Heinrich Himmler. Instead, this is a prequel story that's purposefully contained to the castle and its surrounding city. What it does do, however, is kick off exploration with the same plot beat. It isn't long before BJ and Wesley are captured and imprisoned in the castle's dungeon. Wesley is taken away to be tortured, and we are left to find our own escape. Rudy Jaeger, dog lover, Helga's second-in-command, and an absolute specimen, quickly clocks that BJ's German is crap and locks us away.
Aus Frankfurt. Sind Sie Frankfurter?
Ja, ein hot dog.
We kinda walked into this one. I mean, BJ doesn't even return a Sieg Heil because he'd rather die than do one. The first half of our DLC is spent slowly working through Castle Wolfenstein. Despite its linearity, we grow intimate with it because we see so many of its cracks and crevices. The dungeon, the docks, the keep, the bedrooms and chambers. Demonstrating the scale of this thing is important because it's the series' namesake. Even the original top-down title is set there. Machine Games' rendition earns its keep in a few ways. Keep. Sometimes I'm so funny. The first is verticality. The Old Blood introduces a new mechanic, wall climbing, that lets BJ scale rough surfaces with a broken pipe. These are always contextual, but it makes us feel like we're unearthing the castle, not just wandering through it. The architecture is gorgeous, dusty while still lived in. Suits of armor, medieval crests, ancient catacombs are all eroded by the returning swastika. The front entrance has been gutted, replaced by brutalist offices and a humongous hangar. Despite the fact that the Nazis were so absorbed by history, they loved to butcher its artifacts. The Nazis' relationship with ancient architecture was not confined to fiction. In 1934, Himmler signed a 100-year lease on his very own Wewelsburg castle for 1 Reichsmark a year. This served as the inspiration for Wolfenstein. He spent the next decade and an enormous amount of SS resources turning it into a Nazi Camelot. The walls were decorated with runic symbols and Germanic crests. The rooms were named after heroes of Teutonic mythology: King Arthur, Henry the Lion, Frederick the Great. One room was set aside specifically to house the Holy Grail when it was eventually found. Beneath the Great Hall was a circular crypt, the Place of the Dead, where coats of arms belonging to deceased SS officers were ceremonially burned in rituals that Himmler described as sacred. Here, he would lecture his subordinates on List and more, and lead meditations where his disciples would try to strengthen their ties to their race souls. Elsewhere, he installed a round table. 12 senior SS officers sat at it, each chair bearing a silver nameplate. They were his knights. He held SS induction ceremonies at the castle. He attempted to commune with the spirits of dead Teutons within its walls. Wewelsburg was designed to become, when the Nazis had conquered the world, the spiritual axis of the new Aryan Age. The floor of Wewelsburg's Great Hall features a mosaic of 12 interlocking runes arranged in a wheel. Himmler commissioned it. Nobody documented what it was supposed to mean. A former SS officer invented its significance in the 1950s, calling it the Black Sun, a mystic energy source for the renewal of the Aryan race. Just like how the original Nazis took thin concepts and ran with it, the symbol has been used by neo-Nazis ever since. I told myself I wouldn't talk about the present day in this video. We're going to cover neo-Nazis when we turn to the new Colossus. But it's worth mentioning that in 2022, a white supremacist called Peyton Gendron killed 10 people in Buffalo. When he did, he wore the Black Sun on his body armor. Himmler built an occult fantasy castle using slave labor, decorated its floor with a symbol he never explained, and 70 years later, people are dying for it. A rat guides BJ through his exploits, leading to plenty of secret areas to pore over. Some are unlocked by slipping keys into mystic artifacts that reveal secret chambers behind paintings of King Otto the Great, a holy Roman emperor that Helga is obsessed with. Just like Wewelsburg, the Nazis' weirdness is compounded with the castle's ancient weirdness too. In one of the bedrooms is a bookshelf that opens a secret passage. The trigger is a copy of Hamlet. A few floors away we find Wesley, beaten, tortured, and left for dead by Rudy Jaeger.
I was a bit worried we had lost you. Greta, bleib! Later was hungry. I didn't want the flesh to go to waste. I'm sure you understand.
Rudy feels like a James Bond henchman. All of Wolfenstein's Nazis are exaggerated, but his love of dogs slips quickly into obsession. Dogs are his whole deal. He has dozens of them spread around the castle. A German shepherd called Greta is his favourite. He feeds Wesley to her. Sadly, the Nazi love for dogs means Wolfenstein makes us kill a lot of them. Dogs aren't Nazis, they're the only part of this regime that was just following orders. BJ stabs Greta and it hurls Rudy into a frenzy, dashing off to prepare for his later boss fight and giving us a great chance to talk about the Old Blood's pulpy combat. Senior game designer Arcade Berg told PC Gamer, "Every time we hear comparisons to Tarantino, we gladly take the compliment. We haven't strived to make something like that, but I can see what they're talking about. The Old Blood is way more pulp than the New Order. You'll definitely feel that old B-movie style when playing the game." The Old Blood is tough. In fact, even on Bring 'em On difficulty, it's on the verge of being frustratingly unfair. The most infamous moment is where we are right now, a bridge sequence that leads BJ out of the castle into the neighbouring town of Paderborn. Waves of Nazis are followed by a super soldier, which is then followed by a Panzerhunden you have to kill, and another wave of goons to finish off. But thankfully, the violence stays pulpy and the design is detail-oriented to separate 1946 from 1960. The broken pipes that BJ uses for climbing are also a crude instrument of death, hollowed out so blood can spurt out to the end. The fact that BJ was imprisoned means he's topless for over half of our time, something that lends to the power fantasy. He doesn't need a uniform, just look at his muscles. When you do find armor, it's in the form of Viking helmets and medieval plates of steel, a smart way to lend to the game's interest in history. Elite super soldiers aren't fully mobile yet, Death's Head hasn't managed to fully upgrade his war machine. That means they're attached to generators with cables. If you turn off those generators, they shut down. It shows the limitations of the enemy and how much they grow when you return to the base game. Wolfenstein's city is rustic. It's a village that's very much of its time, but still feels distinctly old. Flaming braziers light our way. Watermills are connected to dams and rivers. It all contrasts the booming, mechanical feel of the New Order in a way that stops the Old Blood from feeling like a couple of levels bolted onto the new game. To be honest, by just giving it a chapter and not a whole video, I think I undersell it.
What's your name?
Annette, what is yours?
William J. Blaskowitz, U.S. military.
Do people call you that?
Annette Krauss and Ludwig Kessler meet BJ in the village. Kessler is leading a small resistance movement here, investigating Helga and her occult research. By small, I mean two. It's two people, it's just him and Annette. This is very similar to how he was characterized in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, except Annette is a new wrinkle. She's a gay Jew who escaped a concentration camp. She's enamored by BJ. Seeing this topless, blood-covered monster of a man, she lights up, immediately able to tell that he's here to save them. She notes that today is the day of Purim, a Jewish holiday. As a nod to his own heritage, BJ already knows. There isn't much time to get to know each other though, because Rudy Yeager appears and declares revenge on us for killing his dog. Unfortunately, Rudy is a pushover, bringing a fight that doesn't live up to his imposing characterization in the expansion's first half. He's a super soldier with 2 miniguns, but more importantly, 2 weak points instead of 1. That means he's easy to kill. If we hide behind the table on the upper floor, he can't seem to hit us, getting stuck on the stairs. Alas, poor Rudy. I knew him, Horatio. Rudy's death means we can now focus on Helga von Schabs. She's the head of the SS Paranormal Division, a fictional entity unique to Wolfenstein, but with a very real inspiration, the Ahnenerbe. Founded in 1935, the Ahnenerbe was Himmler's passion project, a legitimate SS research institute. Its job was to prove Aryans were a master race that everyone else descended from. The Ahnenerbe considered Iceland a possible holy land for Aryans, building off of Guido von List's work. Some thought it was Atlantis, others thought it was Thule, another name old Wolfenstein games appropriate. The 1938 expedition there was a total failure. The locals laughed at them, they couldn't get excavation permits, and at one point, they simply ran out of Icelandic currency. The funniest thing about the Ahnenerbe is that it ran an entire geophysics research station devoted to proving something called the world ice theory. It was invented by an Austrian engineer named Hans Horbiger, who didn't research it so much as receive it in a dream where he watched a pendulum swing through space until it broke. From this, he concluded that ice was the basic substance of the entire cosmos, a universal ether made of ice. This wasn't a fringe belief. World Ice theory was, in the words of historian Eric Kurlander, the only border science Hitler embraced wholly and with conviction. Dreams are actually a recurring motif in the Old Blood. We can find a secret interview where a prisoner at Castle Wolfenstein, a shoemaker, explains to Helga that he's been having divine nightmares.
Schreckliche, verdrehte Ende, verrottete Haut, die Papierstreifen vom Fleisch lösen und starben nach mir und zerren mich unter die Erde.
A burned down church where rotten hands spring up from below. These dreams eventually guide Helga to Wolfenstein's supernatural secrets. While the game loves to tease and mock the Nazis, it also elevates their belief system to something we can shoot in the face. You'll notice that I haven't mentioned the Spear of Destiny here, the lance that supposedly pierced Christ's side at a famous artifact in the universe of Wolfenstein. Hitler was apparently obsessed with it, but basically everything we know about that obsession comes entirely from a widely debunked book that shares the name by Trevor Ravenscroft. The problem is that Ravenscroft's research included communing with the spirit of a dead man to learn the spear's history, and even then, that story changes numerous times. You might be starting to see why I find occultism so interesting and so wildly ridiculous. We keep coming up against lead researchers who keep changing their sources. The real spear did exist, and Hitler did have it moved to Nuremberg, but the Nazi belief that it held any mystic power was bolted on decades later by an author talking to ghosts. While the New Order focuses on technological weirdness rather than mythological weirdness, it acknowledges that these are two expressions of the same Nazi pathology. We find collectibles that tell us Death's Head's technology can be traced back to sacred artifacts. Laser technology was found, not invented. A letter described how Nazis ransacked an ancient village in Ayacucho where mountain gods are said to live. Presumably this is taken from the Ahnenerb's real-life expedition to Tibet, and the real-world parallels become even more stark when we finally meet Helga von Schabs.
Fasziniert Sie das, Franz?
Helga is Ms. Trunchbull from Matilda if Trunchbull had a drinking problem. She's lost her leg to polio, meaning she's another in a long line of Nazis who fate seems to punish with a physical disability. Death's Head's face is scarred and Engel has her jaw blown off. On the one hand, this might seem like Machine Games are pulling from James Bond, crudely disfiguring its villains to make them seem less human. When it comes to Bond, I think that's fair, but with Wolfenstein, I think that's a misguided reading. Any quote-unquote imperfections the game gives to the Nazis are here for one reason, to show their hypocrisy. If Helga wasn't so ambitious, so self-serving, and so calculated, her disability and alcoholism would have put her in a camp. Despite her limited screen time, we learn plenty about her through secret diaries, tape recordings, and the whisperings of her men. She survived alone in the Amazon for years. She's a connoisseur of wine, something BJ exploits to get close to her. She's an understated villain, but her shadow looms large before we eventually meet her. A mystery is formed. What exactly is she doing here? Well, she's doing archaeological research to unearth King Otto's secrets. She believes she's his direct descendant and once had a glorious weapon that helped him rule. Hilariously, Heinrich Himmler thought similarly. At Castle Weffelsberg, Himmler dedicated his bedroom to Heinrich I, the real-life father of King Otto the Great. He would join expeditions where they tried to dig up his remains. Why the obsession, you might ask? Well, Himmler believed that he was the reincarnation of Heinrich. Helga writes how she thinks King Otto was communicating with her from beyond the grave. Himmler frequently held conversations with what he believed to be the spirit of Heinrich and declared he received advice from him. On the 2nd of July each year, he held a midnight ritual in the crypt to commemorate the birth of the king. BJ's German and taste for wine is so atrocious that Helga immediately identifies him as a spy. But before she can kill us, an earthquake. Her troops have used dynamite at a nearby dig site. In minutes, the city is effectively destroyed, but that's not what we should be worried about. Shamblers emerge. It wouldn't be a Wolfenstein game without Nazi zombies appearing somewhere. Depending on your choices, Annette or Kessler are transformed. Why doesn't BJ turn into a shambler? Sheer willpower, mate, sit down. Interacting with the supernatural directly adds spice to the Old Blood's finale. The New Order is wild and wacky, but it's grounded in science fiction. Robots, super concrete, Nazi ideology taken to its abstract conclusion. Unfortunately for this expansion, the Old Blood released at the height of a wary fatigue with Nazi zombies. Call of Duty cornered the market, and despite the fact this was always Wolfenstein's domain, newcomers thought it was just stealing from other franchises. Shamblers are easy to kill. A couple of smacks of the pipe and they go down immediately. In fact, it's more effective than bullets. However, there's a great chunk here as BJ dives into the catacombs to find Helga, where Shamblers and Nazis fight it out. The enemy actively does damage, but they're hardly allies. In fact, they're a hazard. Any Nazis we kill come back to life, meaning stealth is completely disincentivized and we need to go out all guns blazing. That emphasis on rising action might be why the puzzle chamber before the final boss isn't really a puzzle chamber. It's built up in collectibles, a secret vault that hides Otto's greatest secret, but when we finally reach it, Helga's already solved the puzzle and we just need to fight Shamblers as a door opens. It's a shame we don't get to interact with the mystical aspect of the supernatural, just the bloodthirsty. We were a few years off from the great puzzles that machine games would pivot to with Indiana Jones.
You're that fucking American, aren't you? Who killed my hunter Rudy? I must say you're stubborn.
Helga resurrects King Otto's secret, a giant, mummified golem. Typically, she loses control of it almost immediately and it splats her against the wall. Cue boss fight. The golem is so large that it can't move, meaning the arena is split over 2 platforms. Nazis attack us as well, but they're not backup, they're fodder. A way to scoop up more armor as the monster smashes us and them with huge clomping fists. It's not the most imaginative boss, and lends to an overall boss fight issue Wolfenstein has elsewhere. Looking at you, London Monitor, but it at least feels like a climactic way to put a cap on the old blood. A supernatural threat is eliminated. Death's Head's coordinates are retrieved. Helga von Schabs lies dead. Shame then that it was all for nothing. Let's head back to the present. The New Order has a complicated structure as a video game. It's simultaneously a reboot and ties back to older titles. It's an alternate universe that contains 2 separate timelines. You get a chunky prologue, a time jump, a rampage through the asylum to introduce the new status quo, some downtime with Anya's family, a substantial level where BJ ransacks a Nazi checkpoint, a donder around a train, and a prison break, all before the game settles into its rhythm of mission back to HQ mission. It feels less like a typical first-person shooter and more like a novel. Chapters lead BJ from point A to point B, C, and D, furthering his characterization as he confronts this new world where the Nazis have won.
The war ain't over. Look at all these Nazis walking around.
They won.
It's over. The Nazis rule the world now. They are everywhere.
Taking refuge with Anya's grandparents were brought up to speed. On December 21st, 1948, the Nazis dropped an atom bomb on New York, a narrative beat that takes inspiration from Philip K. Dick's novel The Man in the High Castle. December 21st is also the date of the winter solstice, a pagan holiday that, I shit you not, Heinrich Himmler tried to replace Christmas with. In fact, official SS documents were forbidden from using the word. It's a poetic piece of alternate history construction for machine games, but BJ is less concerned with the death of Christmas and simply disgusted by the fact that the US surrendered at all. He bleeds red, white, and blue, and never considered that his country could be defeated. The history of his successes across a litany of games might explain why he feels the failure of the prologue so keenly. As far as he's concerned, the Nazis won because he didn't fulfill his objective. His hatred of Nazis is so embedded that it's not just that they won the war, it's the fact that any of them are still alive. Thankfully, he has a nice, clean way to let out his rage. He kidnapped one of the officers who attacked the asylum. Time for an interrogation. Lovely character beats drip through his violence. He's going to chop the Nazi into little pieces with a chainsaw, but first, he's got to get some splatter protection. The chainsaw is a violent weapon that speaks for itself, but he refers to it as an appliance. It furthers his charm, enhances that power fantasy. But the ideology that he's fighting was built on the idea that choice, real choice, the kind that defines a person, was never available to everyone equally. Your destiny, the Nazis argued, was written in your blood before you were born. Thomas Dalton might not have been a 1930s Nazi, just a modern day one, but he says as much in his introduction to the myth of the 20th century. Quote, "Race is destiny, biology is destiny, genetics is destiny." I wonder if Friedrich Keller, the SS officer that BJ chops up here, agrees with that. Is it imprinted in his genetic code that he would rat out his resistance fighter father to Death's Head before the events of the game? Is his biology to blame for confessing that BJ's old friends have been taken to Eisenwald prison? We'll never know because he's dead now. Shame. Machine Games toys with this idea of fate. If you push past the Sieg Heils, you actually find a game that interrogates determinism. In a meta sense, that's what this series does as a soft reboot. The New Order's connections to previous Wolfenstein games are thin, but they're there. References to past events, like Caroline getting shot in Raven Software's underrated 2009 game, a Death's Head recognizing BJ, but when this studio got hold of this IP, they decided to keep the core of Wolfenstein without becoming slaves to its messy, spread out canon. Wolfenstein 3D appears as disparate nightmares that BJ can have, more of a nod to the series' legacy than lore, though a newspaper clipping does hint that BJ tried and failed to assassinate Hitler years ago. Eventually, BJ will meet Thekla, a mathematician and member of the resistance that does believe in determinism. It's not inherently a Nazi ideology. The Nazis, like so much, just bastardized it to fit their politics. She argues that we are machines of biology, nothing more, but BJ simply challenges her with one question. What about the soul? He discards Rosenberg's race soul in favor of something simpler, more romantic, and it combats her clinical view. But the main way the game questions determinism waits for us inside Eisenwald prison.
They're making a pickup. You find a way to get down on the roof of that prison transport bus. You hide on that roof and you can ride it all the way into Eisenwald prison.
Anya and BJ shag their way to Berlin, partners in romance and in revolution. Eisenwald is under Death's Head's control. As we break in, we hear him on the tannoy doing mindfulness exercises. He's trying to find prisoners who will give up their fellow freedom fighters. What's especially cool about Wolfenstein's new reality is that it considers the history of how the Nazis won and what that world sincerely looks like. Their discovery of technologies far beyond the realm of science is the catalyst, but there's a chain reaction of choices that led us to where we are now. The Russians were defeated in 1947 because giant metal Panzerhunds smashed through them. They didn't just beat the United States to the punch with the invention of the atom bomb, they infiltrated the Manhattan Project and destabilized it. The obliteration of the UK immediately slapped the swastika on numerous countries because we're not just an island, we're a Commonwealth. The seismic impact of the British Empire and the Commonwealth on holding back the Nazis has been subverted here. After the fall of France, the UK was the nucleus of Allied efforts in Europe. In Wolfenstein, the Nazis cut our head off and the world soon fell. I've got to commend how Machine Games handles Sweden. As a Swedish company, they rightly condemn Sweden's involvement in Nazi ideology. Their status as a neutral country has punctured the zeitgeist, but in reality, some Swedish troops worked in concentration camps and much of its national fortune is built on Nazi gold. They supplied them with iron. Neutral is a soft way of saying they played both sides. Newspaper clippings state outright, our government cooperated with the Nazis. Fingers are pointed at the real-life Swedish State Institute for Racial Biology, which predated Germany in being the first institute in the world to follow through on eugenics research. It led to compulsory sterilization for some groups. Yikes, Sweden! When it comes to its most important narrative beat, Wolfenstein doesn't let you play both sides. Back in the prologue, its alternate history branched off.
I would have elected Ada, but I will defer to your preference, Captain.
Death's Head captured BJ, Fergus, and Wyatt, and forced us to make a choice. Who shall he kill? For them, the future isn't set in stone. It lives or dies on the player's decision, and there are notable changes depending on which timeline you pick. Wolfenstein didn't need a branching path. Its writing is confident enough, and its characters are absorbing enough to carry us right to the credits. So why did Machine Games do this? Creative director Jens Mattis has the answer. In an interview with Digital Trends, he said, "We figured if we have Death's Head force a Sophie's choice upon the player, it would be a really strong impetus that would align your motivations for the rest of the game. It depends on what kind of player you are. If you're a player that deploys ethics into a game, then you would have a moral imperative to save Wyatt. He's younger and he technically has more life ahead of him, so morally it's the more defensible choice. If you're the kind of player who is more about the raw fun factor of a game, you'd be more likely to choose Fergus. He's a crazier character. The prologue tries to make you care about both men equally. Wyatt and Fergus save our life before we reach Death's Head, but I think the beats are clumsily biased toward Fergus. We're with him on the plane for a substantial amount of time before Wyatt joins the cast, and there's an implied history here. Fergus is BJ's friend. Wyatt is just a kid that he feels sorry for. If we choose to kill Fergus, he accepts his fate stoically. It's a war, he says. People die. What a badass. Jens might say that Wyatt is the moral choice, but ultimately Fergus is Scottish, so for this playthrough, I saved my boy and BJ found him in Eisenwald prison. Does that make me a nationalist? Who knows? Don't ask difficult questions, like and subscribe. What does it mean to make an impossible choice under fascism? When Death's Head makes us choose, he does make us choose. On my first playthrough, I decided that I don't negotiate with Nazis, so I just stared at the floor hoping the game would decide for me. It did decide. It decided all over the place. Fergus died, Wyatt died, and BJ died. Game over. This limitation shows how oppressive and dominating the Nazi regime is. At the height of its power, Nazism offers just two options: comply or die.
Here I was, getting ready for the eternal nap, and this Nazi-killing jammy bastard shows up out of nowhere.
We find Fergus leashed up in the center of the prison. Death's Head's been torturing him for years. His face is burned, his eyes are hollow. He's carrying a frantic, rambling death wish that fuels him almost as much as BJ's rage does. Time for a prison break. So, while a dynamic duo go all guns blazing, let's talk about the differences between Wyatt and Fergus. Despite being a king fucker, I love Fergus. He's a wild-eyed madman that once took a senior role in his relationship with BJ, but 14 years later, they are connected by helplessness. BJ was in a coma. Fergus was in prison. The fact he's a royalist actually lends to how the game treats its timelines. If you say Fergus, he belts "God Save the King" as he wrestles with a Nazi. If you choose Wyatt, he sings the much catchier "Pack Up Your Troubles." The structural beats are the same. There isn't an alternate ending, unique missions, or wild changes to BJ's escapades. Character deaths happen in the same place, and both men break down with survivor's guilt at the same point. Death's Head was always fated to die. The Nazi war machine was always going to be smashed. BJ finds the third option to that impossible choice: carnage. Instead, the differences are mechanical and vibes-based.
Gosh, oh my, I thought I was a goner. And here you are, back from the dead, to save us all. Imagine that. Oh.
Wyatt isn't nearly as funny as Fergus. Just take later when we discover the secrets of Dat You Should. The Scotsman monologues charmingly like he's an unhinged stand-up comic. Wyatt just gapes at the ancient treasure and mumbles. Fergus dishes out more swearing while Wyatt sits in contrast with a dash-gum Boy Scout demeanor. Fergus's room shows that he finds comfort in his role as a soldier. A giant bomb hangs from the ceiling, watching over him as he sleeps. He embraces his cynicism, whereas Wyatt fights against it with plants, books, and pictures of nature, an environment designed to keep him calm. Despite my preference, it definitely feels like Machine Games put more time into Wyatt's characterization though. He grows in confidence, eventually turning into a leader for the Resistance. He's the one who lays out the plan for our endgame siege on Death's Head. Fergus doesn't have that sort of arc. He just slips snugly into his role as BJ's mad pal. The fact that both men break down with survivor's guilt means there's no right answer in who you choose. The game punishes you all the same. Fergus scolds Blasco because he thinks it was his time, whereas Wyatt's youth is the crux of his pain. "You left a boy in charge of a man's work," he snaps. The impossible choice feels more impossible after it's made. The most substantial shift is what your choice does to the cast. Fergus brings Thekla and Wyatt brings the mysterious Jay, a psychedelic guitarist who is definitely not Jimi Hendrix. What are you talking about? Sure, he looks like him and plays guitar like him, but no, that is totally a coincidence. This is Jay. Get your head out your ass. Before BJ can bond with him, Jay hands out one of the hardest lines in the game.
"You don't get it, do you? Before all this, before the Germans, before the war, back home, man, you were the Nazis."
When BJ touches his guitar uninvited, Jay rounds on him. He talks about the Jim Crow America that he grew up in, the segregated theaters, his father drafted to die for a country that treated him as less than a citizen. They make up over an acid trip and a guitar, but the line doesn't get answered. For a game built on the clean fantasy of good guys shooting bad guys, Jay is the one character who turns the mirror back on the heroes. The fascist logic that BJ's fighting wasn't invented in Germany. It had a homegrown dialect, and Jay lived under it, something the sequel will touch on. The implication is that while BJ was in a coma, Fergus and Wyatt both saved and recruited someone to the resistance in their respective timelines. Whether it's Thekla or Jay, the fact the choice changes this means both men were heroes while BJ was lost. Fergus and Thekla argue about fate, but in Wyatt's timeline that chat is swapped to be about music. The kid tries to bond with Jay over instruments. He learned plenty for his marching band, but Jay asks him to hush up so he could do some air guitar. Mechanically, there are tweaks. Fergus gives us health upgrades, while Wyatt offers armor upgrades, so the feeling of combat shifts. Exploration minigames are different too. Wyatt teaches BJ to lockpick and Fergus teaches us how to hotwire panels. That's fun in its own right, but what it does to the level design is very fun. Both electronic safes and mechanical locks exist in the world, but your choice impacts what you can and can't interact with. They don't just get replaced. Thankfully, no matter who you choose, our NPC friends don't take damage. We don't have to worry about covering them or collateral damage when things get messy. The game doesn't want you to stop exploding and shooting things. Fergus and Wyatt can take care of themselves, though Eisenwald is the only time you fight alongside them. I wish the game injected more moments to let us feel their presence in the action. Without it, sometimes, BJ feels like a one-man army carrying the resistance on his back. That feeling fights against the narrative, because the resistance is key to taking down Death's Head. Now that the gang have escaped together and Resistance HQ is on the horizon, we'll see that clearly with the Kreisau Circle. The Kreisau Circle was real. Sort of. During the height of the Third Reich, a collection of men, women, military personnel, socialists, conservatives, Catholics, and Protestants came together at the Moltke estate in Kreisau to talk academically about what Germany would look like after the Nazis. Wolfenstein's Kreisau is more bombastic and severe, but the spirit of its real-world counterpart is intact. A group of people from different social circles, united in their hatred of the Nazis.
Caroline, you're alive.
If you call shitting in a bag living, 3 pulverized vertebrae. You?
Head trauma, 4 inches of cast iron shrapnel right in the conch. Still in there.
Meet Caroline Becker, the big boss, a total badass, and a woman BJ has a storied history with. His grit is matched by hers. Years ago, she was shot and disabled, but being forced into a wheelchair hasn't stopped her from taking the fight to the Nazis. The majority of the Kreisau Circle are, by Nazi standards, impure. Caroline is a physically disabled lesbian. Thekla, Fergus, Wyatt, and Max are mentally disabled. Bombati is a minor character who joins us later, but he's a black man. Set Roth is a Jew. Rosenberg's race soul connects to how the Nazis viewed disabled people. The argument went that mental illness was a sign of racial decay. Pure-blooded Aryans couldn't possibly be schizophrenic, they came from Atlantis! But Fergus and Wyatt, interestingly, show how illogical this belief was. Regardless of the timeline, they're 2 men who suffer from PTSD after the war. That's an external, traumatic event changing their psychology. What could it possibly have to do with race? PTSD wouldn't be diagnosed until 40 years later, but during the war, Nazis did have a term for this. Kriegsneurotiker, war neurotics, or Kriegszitterer, war tremblers. World War I veterans who naturally suffered from this were among the first to go when a mass extermination of disabled people was ordered. We bask in the company of the Kreisau Circle. HQ is a place for rest, if not relaxation, and there are lovely optional moments that strengthen BJ's bond with his allies. Later, he'll scare Max Hoss with a power saw, the loud noise sets him off, and after, he tries to find a way to make amends. An optional objective appears that lets you find Max's toys, and when you return them, BJ takes a minute to sort some alphabet cubes so they spell his name. All of this is important for Wolfenstein's feeling. It's a reminder of who we're fighting for and who we're fighting against, and it broadens the scope into an ensemble piece. HQ is surprisingly cozy. The decor isn't militant, it's bohemian. Fairy lights, candles, photographs of those we've lost. Newspaper clippings line the walls, documenting the Nazis' rise to power, picking up on propaganda, and these will change slightly as the story goes on, with clippings that describe BJ's escapades. Our next mission, an attack on the London Nautica, eventually gets paraded as a gas explosion because the Nazis don't want to let on that they suffered a major blow. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi Minister for Propaganda, wrote in his diary, "Think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play." And despite their victory, the Nazis are so desperate to hold on to power that they're still lying to their people. The changes to HQ are consistent throughout. The choppers we steal sit in the hangar and are a focal point for optional character interactions. For a better example, we eventually save prisoners from a concentration camp, and when we bring them back, they populate the space, talking in hushed whispers about the mythical, terrifying man who saved them. This isn't just a temporary base, it's a home for the downtrodden, and constantly reminds us of our progress through the little details. What's surprising, and frankly a shame, is that there isn't ambient music for this space, despite the fact the composer, Mick Gordon, played with the game's soundscape to give Kreisau and the Nazis different themes. Our time in headquarters is accompanied by an anxious humming from the sewers beneath, or the wail of sirens pouring out of Eisenwald prison above. Before Doom 2016 shot him into the stratosphere, Gordon's work on the New Order soundtrack solidified him as an all-timer composer. The Nazi machine has overwhelming industrial sounds and music concrete to make the Reich feel alienating. Action is accompanied by intense, thundering percussion and heavy metal guitars. It's a distorted sound because Gordon warped classic instruments, turned them into something otherworldly and demonic. However, the soundtrack that accompanies BJ in the Kreisau Circle is acoustic and rustic. Just take the Resistance theme that plays after a successful mission.
I'm sorry about your legs.
Don't be. I've learned how to fly.
Organic claps, and specifically the acoustic guitar, return again and again to show BJ's desire for inner peace and a world that can strip off the machine men and go back to something more natural. Nazi ideology twists the world into a manufactured vision. The lies and propaganda about being descendants of Norse gods let them justify their cruelty, but BJ Blazkowicz sees the world as it is. Everyone who shares his view gets touched by the acoustic guitar, especially Anya Olowa.
William?
Yes.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Everyone in the Kreisau Circle represents something, whether it's an outlook or a demographic. Bobby Bram, a surly Englishman who's only in the game for 5 minutes, represents the way fascism can kill hope. Anya represents the ways it can't. By 16, she was studying for a doctorate in archaeology. The war took that from her. Before BJ crashed into her life, she had already lost a prospective future to the Nazis. Then, she falls in love with a man who can't tell her how he feels. She watches Death's Head's men steal patients for experiments. She sees her parents get executed, and she still keeps going. She is the only member of the Circle who gives BJ something active to fight for. They share that dream of a white picket fence. Her hope gives him hope. Without her, he's a Nazi killer. With her, he's a dreamer. But machine games are careful not to make her passive. She isn't simply waiting for BJ to finish the war so they can live happily ever after. In fact, she's done plenty of Nazi killing herself. Maybe that's why they're such a cute couple. Under the pseudonym of her cousin Ramona, Anya eventually confesses to BJ her biggest secret. During the occupation of Poland, she killed Nazis. Cyanide on a sausage, choking during sex. One of those murders went slightly wrong though, and she got pregnant with, in her words, a Nazi baby. She had an abortion. She uses Ramona as a framing device, a layer of distance, because she's ashamed and uncertain how the man she loves will respond. It's a remarkable piece of writing, not because it's shocking, which it is, but because it shows us what survival under fascism actually looks like. It isn't always clean, and it isn't always guns and explosions. Sometimes it's doing whatever you have to do to get through the day, carrying the weight of those decisions afterwards, and looking to the future with hope. Nazi baby is a particular turn of phrase that's very human and could be read as sitting in opposition to the game's thesis. After all of our talk about race souls, is the game really saying that Nazis are born, not made? I've seen those takes and I think it's an uncharitable way to read this. It's Anya's way of describing an unbearable decision that she wrestled with as a political choice rather than a personal one. Having the child of an SS officer comes with an inevitable domino effect. Aryan children were so important to the regime that Hitler set up breeding houses to create them. Those babies were called Lebensborn, or Spring of Life. Not only that, but in Anya's homeland of Poland, over 200,000 children were kidnapped from their parents and brainwashed into believing they had been abandoned or abused, all so they could be adopted by Nazi families. I never said this video would be fun. Anya's abortion is a refusal of that logic. Her body belongs to her. She might not have been pulled into Lebensborn, but if the Nazis discovered she was pregnant, it might only have been a matter of time. Under a totalitarian regime, she exercised agency over her own life, and in a messy, complicated way, that act of will symbolizes her hope. But when it comes to the claim that Nazis aren't born, they're made, we see that best with Klaus Kreutz.
Yeah, perhaps you should consider removing them tattoos.
I will, in time. I was, as you Americans say, all wet when I got them, and I'm sorry to say it was a very proud moment of my life. I want removing them to be an even prouder moment. No more Nazis, no more tattoos.
So long as you don't get in the way of me killing Nazis, we'll see eye to eye.
Can a Nazi be redeemed? Wolfenstein seems to think so. Klaus used to work for the regime, but when his son was born with a clubfoot, the Gestapo killed his family. He was confronted with the awful but inevitable revelation that fascism eats everyone, even the fascists. For a game that celebrates the killing of Nazis, it's an interesting choice to make one of our friends an old one. We and BJ revel in creative ways to brutalize them, and in another world, Klaus would be strapped to a chair facing down this here appliance. In fact, when BJ sees that Klaus has a swastika tattoo, he lunges at him without a second thought. Klaus was one of them, so he deserves to die. That's what the gameplay's taught us. He's very matter-of-fact with his delivery that adds sincerity to the whole thing. It's not melancholic or soppy. The game doesn't ask us to pat Klaus on the back and reward him for good behavior, his choices just are. He was a Nazi, now he's not. Instead, he's chosen a better path, acting as Max's carer. The game doesn't put his redemption on the Kreisau Circle. It's not like they took him prisoner and deprogrammed him. He abandoned the Nazis by himself, much too late, and his rejection of their ideology means he's no longer one of them. But it's worth considering what this means for all the men that BJ kills. What if this guy could be redeemed? Or this one? Not this guy, he had it coming. Wolfenstein has a brutal but straightforward answer. You have two choices: reject Nazism or die for it. Option 1 is always there for those who want it. You can redeem yourself. You can switch sides. You just better do it before BJ finds you. Our monsters are monsters, but you can regain your humanity if you want to. You just need to abandon a monstrous ideology. When asked about the way this is all framed, Jens Mattis told Giant Bomb, "From day one, we didn't want to cartoonify Nazi ideology. We have these over-the-top, larger-than-life antagonists. I mean, our main antagonist is called Death's Head. But within that boundary, within that universe, we wanted to make sure that we conveyed what Nazi ideology is about. It's far too convenient to put a swastika on somebody and say, shoot them. For us, it was incredibly important to show what Nazi ideology was about, and that the player gets to experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. It's important to remember that the game doesn't focus on Germans as the enemy, it focuses on Nazis, something that's strengthened with the sequel. Wolfenstein's Kreisau Circle separates itself from its real-world inspiration because it's a human project, not a nationalist one. Its members are made up of all nationalities: American, Polish, English, but most notably, German. Thekla, Klaus and Max are German. Caroline is German and she's its leader. The resistance is in the heart of Berlin to reinforce the fact that now the Nazis have won, change can only happen from within. Historically, groups like the White Rose or the Edelweiss Pirates formed the real-life German resistance movement. They might not have killed Hitler and saved the world, but what mattered was they tried to do something. The Kreisau Circle is more effective because this is a video game and we are BJ Blazkowicz, but the idea is the same. What matters is the fight back. Success is subjective. So with everyone gathered, Caroline lays out the first step in that fight. Project Whisper, a helicopter aircraft that is virtually silent and undetectable. One of Death's Head's inventions. There are 3 prototypes in London. We are going to steal them. 14 years of Nazi control have eaten at Bobby Bram. He smuggles BJ into London and leads us to the London Nautica, a Nazi research centre that looms over the capital city. BJ's plan is to infiltrate it, get killing, and steal some choppers as quickly as possible. Bobby has other ideas. He smashes into the entrance and blows himself up. Desperation has turned him into a suicide bomber. Wolfenstein argues that violence is the only rational response to fascism. It can't be debated, can't be argued with, it can only be killed. The only logical answer to something this cosmically wrong is to shoot it in the face. Thankfully, the game's shooting feels great, and because the Kreisau Circle are underdogs, it lends to the psychiatrist Franz Fanon and his book The Wretched of the Earth. In 1960, he wrote, "At the level of individuals, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect." Fanon fought for the French in World War II, but later wrote this about anti-colonial liberation in Algeria. Even though it's not directly about Nazis, the message is the same. Violence is both strategically necessary and psychologically restorative for people who are oppressed. It explains Anya's transformation into a serial killer after years under Nazi rule. A violent act is a gear shift for a population's psychology, and one that's difficult to undo. That reading lends to the enemy as well. Nazis spread a narrative that the Aryan race was historically oppressed, justifying their own brand of violence. Wolfenstein is bloodthirsty and explosive. It's why it's so fun to play. Heads pop off and chunks smear walls. The sheer scale of its chaos is clear right back at the opening when we assault Death's Head's fortress, and the fact environments are destructible means even when you're not shooting bad guys, you're destroying something. It makes almost every bullet cathartic, even if you miss. But there's another side to its carnage: stealth. Most combat arenas encourage the same loop: sneak in, kill priority targets, and go all guns blazing. Making stealth a key component harks back to the original Castle Wolfenstein, a top-down action stealth game where killing was possible, but a lack of ammo meant it was never plan A. The New Order drowns you in bullets, so the game needed to find another way to incentivize stealth. The answer here is the reinforcement system. Two commanders will wander an arena. If they spot you, they call in backup. That means they're always your first stop, and God help any soldiers that get in the way. It's a shame then that the New Order stealth is underdeveloped. There are three options: classic melee takedowns, knife throwing, and eventually an incredibly overpowered silenced pistol. There are no silenced sniper rifles for faraway infiltration, no means of distracting a guard. You crouch, you wait your turn, and you make your move. And for a game with such satisfying action, that often feels counterintuitive. We want to be cracking skulls, not sitting waiting for a soldier's AI to turn around. More options would go a long way to making stealth satisfying, and even if tossing a rock isn't on the table, enemy AI could do with a shove. Once you're spotted, there's effectively no way to slink back into the shadows. Soldiers hone in on BJ like flies to shit. Sometimes you're spotted in ways that feel unfair. Take this moment in the Old Blood. A Super Trooper spotted me through cover. You could argue that he sees me through this thin gap, but I wouldn't expect vision cones to be that strict considering stealth is so mechanically shallow. Because of Bobby's bomb, stealth is not a priority in the London Nautica. Here, BJ learns that the Nazis aren't done with conquering. They've colonized the moon.
Okay, you put a Nazi on the moon. Fuck you, moon.
Fuck you, moon, BJ says, and yeah, we shoot the shit out of that moon. It's a huge dome in the middle of an exhibit that Nazis can hide behind on balconies above. We're encouraged to destroy it, so there's nowhere to hide. With his finger on the trigger, his mindset shifts. Anything tainted by them is beyond saving. The destructible environments show BJ's terrifying destructive capabilities. It's no wonder the Nazis later nickname him Terror Billy, but mechanically, the game does miss a mark with its explosions. Big booms don't feel as big or boom as they ought to. Grenades are too contained, and later when we get a goddamn rocket launcher attached to an assault rifle, its blast radius is too small for what it promises to be. Here I am, rocketing at a Nazi standing next to a pillar at point-blank range, and it barely touched him. Bobby Bram's death is tragic, but when we're in control, the violence swings into beautiful slapstick. Nazis flop to the floor. If we try to use melee on one that's charging toward us, we get locked in a stabbing contest where BJ just tanks damage until the goon is dead. In a bathroom stall, he can stealth kill a guy by drowning throwing him in a toilet bowl, stabbing him in the skull just to be safe, and finally flushing for good measure. Don't want blood staining the bowl, you might catch something. BJ's rampage does get mechanically interrupted though, quite often in fact, because you need to pick up resources manually. Ammo, health, armor, none of it is slurped up just by running over it. There are a couple of reasons why this is the case. The first is it's supposed to hark back to classic Wolfenstein. It's why the HUD is in the center of the screen. However, new Wolfie has a different feeling to old Wolfie. It's more chaotic, there are more enemies, there's more to be aware of, so in the thick of battle, it can feel like you're just running around spamming the interact button. And the radius isn't very forgiving, so BJ will be staring at his feet a lot. This matters because despite his massive frame, BJ isn't a tank. Tactical play is necessitated because Nazis can and will kill you. He might be a walking blitzkrieg, but he's still human. The game combats that with the overcharge mechanic. You can temporarily max out your health beyond its limit, buying you key seconds where you can dive out from cover and get blasting. If things do turn against you, you can take cover and heal up to the nearest 10 automatically. BJ's willpower is characterized in our health pool, and his hands-on attitude is characterized in the perk system. Wolfenstein doesn't ask you to spend points or pick from a menu. It watches what you do and it rewards you for doing more of it. There are 4 trees: stealth, tactical, assault, and demolition, and you level them up purely through action. Stab enough Nazis in the back and you'll unlock perks that make you a better sneak. Land enough headshots from cover and you'll get sharper still. Dual wield your way through a room and the assault tree opens up. Lob enough grenades and demolition starts handing you bigger pouches and bouncing your throws back at the enemy. You become what you do. The game doesn't define BJ for you, you define him through how you play, and that's a pretty perfect fit for how he stands in opposition to the Nazi race soul. He isn't fixed by his genes, but through the choices he makes, he evolves. His inner monologue gives combat a charming and comedic tone. When he stabs a sleeping guard through a mattress, a totally optional interaction, he mutters, "Wake up, you're dead." He revels in the chaos so that we can revel in the chaos too. It's not all business. He's having a little bit of fun, and when he finds a Nazi lab on the upper floors, he even finds time to feel a little bit of wonder.
What do you see?
Ancient artifacts, highly technological in nature.
Death's Head has been studying ancient parchments and strange mystical technologies, reverse engineering them into machines for war. This room is our first reference to the Dat Yeshud, and the discovery of this tech is how the Nazis were able to win the war. They stole and bastardized another culture's inventions. Luckily, that means the Weird Reich has fun guns for us to play with. They might be freaks, but they're freaks with cool toys. This is the Laserkraftwerk. Pucker up and give it a big kiss, it deserves it. It's a lumpy, glorious laser cannon. If you solve an optional puzzle or two, you can upgrade it into something that sizzles Nazis. By the end of the game, it's fully automatic, recharging at power stations dotted around the world. There's a real joy in turning a glorified set of bolt cutters into an instrument of mass Nazi disassembly. That upgrade philosophy runs through the whole arsenal. Almost every gun in the game has an alternate firing mode or a hidden upgrade waiting to be found. The pistol gets a silencer, the shotgun gets a second ammo type. Some of these are story unlocks, but plenty are tucked away in the corners of levels, which means exploration rewards you with firepower. The game wants you to find ways to make your toys nastier, and it succeeds. What's key for all of this is that the shooting feels great. I can't overstate how good the automatic shotguns feel. The longer you hold the trigger, the faster their fire rate gets. BJ is a walking armory, lugging an entire arsenal around with a flick of the weapon wheel, and a face button conveniently swaps to whatever you last held for fast switching mid-fight. Crucially, almost everything can be dual-wielded. Pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, even the sniper rifle, because why the hell not? 2 guns means double the firepower at the cost of accuracy and sprint speed, so there is a real trade-off. Run single and you're fast. Run double and you're a tank with a death wish. Aiming down sights takes a beat too, so the game quietly encourages you to hip-fire your way through the chaos like a maniac. It feels wonderful because it should. These are literally wonder weapons. That word matters. The real Nazis loved their Wunderwaffen, using that name specifically, and the gap between the grandeur of the name and the reality of the engineering is one of the funniest things about them. Yes, this was the regime that invented the V-2 rocket, the jet fighter, and the first mass-produced helicopter. Genuinely world-changing stuff. But it's also the regime that built the Schwerer Gustav, a 1,350-ton railway cannon so enormous it needed 2,000 men to operate and fired a grand total of 48 shells in the entire war. They drew up plans for a sun gun, an orbital space mirror that would fry cities by focusing sunlight. And then there's my favorite, the Kugelpanzer, the ball tank. A one-man armoured sphere that rolls into battle like something out of a cartoon. To date, it seems there's only one that was found after the war. It sits in a Russian museum, and nobody's entirely sure what it was for because it has never been opened. Nazi engineering, everyone. Sometimes genius, sometimes a giant metal ball that nobody can explain. The game renders that same lunacy in the things it sends to kill you, but it all turns to mulch at the end of BJ's barrel. If we return to Guido von List, he wrote, "Those who die a straw death go to Helheim. This is mistakenly thought to refer to those who die of natural causes in their beds, but a straw death actually indicates a meaningless death after a uselessly wasted and pointless life. Those who dread a straw death are useless slackers. They contribute nothing to the development of the world. These are those who are not hot and not cold, and who are therefore to be condemned." At the bottom of the food chain, you've got your bog standard soldiers, cannon fodder and jackboots, there to be mown down in satisfying heaps. Perhaps spurred on by List's insane claim that a purposeless death sends your soul to the Norse underworld Helheim, they charge at BJ indiscriminately, keen to die a martyr's death. But the further up the ladder you go, the weirder it gets. Take the dogs. In 1946, they're flesh and blood camp funds, but by 1960, Death's Head has done what Death's Head does and bolted them into the Panzerhund, a snarling robotic hound the size of a small car that can, the game cheerfully notes, bite through a helicopter. These things are a menace. You're not standing your ground against a Panzerhund, you're backpedaling and praying, dumping lasers into it while looking for the fuel tanks on its back that'll stun it long enough to breathe. It's built up through scripted sections and unfortunately only appears for one mini-boss. I think they could have been used more consistently as an enemy type. Higher up still are the Super Soldaten, hulking armoured brutes wired into heavy weaponry. They're a great encapsulation of the game's combat philosophy because their armor isn't just a health bar, it's a resource. Shoot the plating off and it drops to the floor, ready for you to grab. That means that the toughest enemies in the room are also your best chance of topping up your own armor mid-fight. Risk and reward, welded together. The Nazis didn't build tanks here in the Nautica. In fact, regular tanks are conspicuously absent from the gameplay. They built robot dogs and laser-spewing giants and one-eyed walking siege weapons because the Weird Reich was never satisfied with a weapon that simply worked. Death's Head needed weapons that looked like nightmares. That translates to the guns too. Everything is a hulking geometric monstrosity that looks more abstract and strange as you find and attach upgrades. As BJ enters the hangar ready to steal the choppers, we're surrounded by these sharp, angular creations.
How did you survive? I thought you were dead.
Don't remember much. Remember punching Hans Gross in the face. Remember ascending into the sky. For moments there I thought I was going to heaven. Then falling, then pain.
What's most important for Wolfenstein's combat is how varied it is. BJ doesn't just work from room to room, though that is a big chunk of the loop. Instead, he climbs up elevator shafts while drones shoot at him, or races from a Panzerhund as it tears through Eisenwald prison, or snipes from a cable car as it rolls down a mountain, or fights a big fuck-off mech in the middle of London. Actually, less said about that one the better. Later, on the lunar base, it's all about the laser guns. These rely on recharging stations and conserving ammo so you don't have to plug your gun in during a firefight. An awesome new weapon brings tactical restrictions to consider. That then leads to fighting on the surface of the moon in zero gravity. The sound design changes so all we hear is the breathing in BJ's suit. That means we have to rely on what we see, not what we hear, to take out the roaming drones. It is a shame there aren't zero-gravity soldiers to face here. The context of what we're doing isn't always a winner though. As the gang return to base, Anya points out that the mysterious Dat Yeshud seem to be responsible for the super concrete that the Nazis are building with. To be sure, she sends him into the sewer to find a sample she can test. This happens a few times when we return to headquarters, and the sewer system is as boring the third time as it is the first. The design is dull because it's a video game sewer and they're never fun, though I am partial to Resident Evil 2 remakes. I know I'm in the minority there, so moving on. But the main issue is we're only shooting drones down here, not Nazis. If I'm not killing Nazis, what's the point, game? For a first-person shooter like this, scenario variety is key. I love Wolfenstein shooting, but it would quickly wear out its welcome if every level felt like Death's Head's compound. The sewers aside, the New Order shockingly keeps finding ways to freshen up. whether that's shooting holes in the moon or smashing a mech through a labor camp. Let's change gear. I need to pull the curtain back for a minute. I struggled a lot to write this chapter. Our next stop, Camp Belica, doesn't lend to the pulpy, flippant angle of this video. It's a fictional concentration camp that purposefully draws parallels to Auschwitz. And while the New Order is all about killing and mocking Nazis, our time in Belica scraps the latter. It's set up to be terrifying because that's what the camps were. Nazis are weird, but weird is a glib way to describe putting human beings into cages. And weird isn't strong enough to describe what actually happened there. So instead, let's veer away from race souls and the occult, and instead look at how Machine Games tackles the Reich's greatest sin.
Wolfgang, der hier. Jawohl, Lagerkommandant. Durch die Tür, Sausack!
BJ gets himself arrested. A Jew called Setroth, a member of the mysterious Dat Yeshud, is in here, and we don't have the firepower for a big fat breakout. Just like the subject matter at the heart of this level, this calls for tact, an infiltration. Irene Engel, the Obergruppenführer that BJ met on the train to Berlin, is in charge of the camp. It's a systematic display of her cruelty that pulls from Death's Head. Just like him, she monologues at the prisoners about how they're a cancer. The architecture and processing pulls explicitly from real-life concentration camps, but specifically Auschwitz. At the start of the level, BJ is shunted into a queue of prisoners who are slowly separated into two camps. Those who will work, BJ qualifies because of his hulking size, and those who'll be incinerated. Furnaces, crematoria, cattle cars, iron gates, segregation blocks that partly stop victims from communicating on a mass scale, but are mainly for the sake of isolating families. Psychological cruelty that we see firsthand when BJ swaps blocks with a prisoner who is looking for his wife. The entrance arch is reminiscent of Auschwitz's infamous "Work Sets You Free" gate. The prisoner number that we're tattooed with references Auschwitz too. It was the only Nazi camp that systematically carved registration numbers onto inmates' forearms. There's an earnestness to Wolfenstein's portrayal of the camps. Everywhere else you can see shades of humor, but here it is absent. The closest thing we get to levity is a fellow prisoner, a Namibian man called Bombate. He delivers every line with an "if you're not laughing, you're screaming" gallows humor. Life's too sad and miserable to be sad and miserable, he later tells BJ. The gameplay is restrictive to reinforce the oppression. The freedom we typically see in combat and stealth is absent. BJ can't steal a gun or lash out to the guards until the game lets him. But because of the game Wolfenstein is, it doesn't take the time to embed that oppression. We're a prisoner in Belica for less than 20 minutes before BJ gets to killing. He breaks out in an afternoon. It lends to the power fantasy. Destroying a concentration camp is as liberating as anything else we do in the game, but should that power fantasy arrive so quickly? An hour of gameplay dedicated to slow, grueling, monotonous work and torture wouldn't be fun, but the camps weren't fun. Wolfenstein gives us the first fully playable concentration camp outside of the indie space, and that is to be commended. But if the game was going to tackle this subject matter, I wish it dragged us into it for longer so we can feel how BJ feels. By the time we raise hell, we should be desperate to get out of here, and the best way to make a player want something to be over is to make it monotonous. The boring bits, like mixing concrete, whiz past, vignettes to consider as we barrel on to the cool blastathon on the horizon. It's during that downtime that we meet Set Roth.
I swore an oath to never betray the secrets of Das Yichud.
Fuck your oath. People are dying. The resistance calls on you.
Set is a surly grump, something that isn't surprising considering where we are. Surprisingly, the Nazis have kept him alive, possibly because Engel knows he's a member of Dat Yeshud. He promises to help us, but only if we destroy the camp and help free the inmates. Things are gonna get loud. Death's Head takes inspiration from the real-life Nazi Joseph Mengele, more on him later, but interestingly, despite the game's sci-fi tone, Belica doesn't focus on the real-life scientific experiments that often happened in these places. Perhaps that was Machine Games trying to be tactful, but they still inject horror where they can. Barbarism and sadism are the pillars of this chapter. When BJ enters, we see Engel rip a baby from its mother and dangle it upside down. The game doesn't need to show what happens next. That would be gratuitous. For the rest of our time here, we see no children. Belica pitches itself as a labor camp first. The super concrete we discussed earlier is made here by the prisoners, operating bulky manual machinery. What's key is that it's labor that is unnecessary. Across the game, we see that the Nazis have fully embraced robotics, and this process could easily be automated. It exists to kill the will of the prisoners. It exists to exhaust their mind and bodies. It's pointless cruelty. The guards are idiots, blindly following orders and falling limp if anything goes wrong in the camp's strict process. BJ sabotages a cement mixer, and even though it only affects his station, they shut down the whole pipeline for the rest of the day. A solitary robot with a built-in furnace marches the grounds, the only true threat. But the prisoners are so broken that it's all the Nazis need. One of the ways that we're exposed to the cruelty of the camps is through Das Messer, aka the knife.
Solche Dreistigkeit habe ich von Ungeziefern wie dir noch nie gesehen. Unglaublich.
The knife isn't given a real name. The prisoners only know him by that moniker, so BJ only knows him by that moniker. He tortures us and kicks us into a nearby furnace. There's no purpose behind it, no examination of why he does this, not even a pretense that he's doing it for science. And that pulls from history. The camps were full of knives. Irma Grace, the Beast of Belsen, carried a cellophane whip and set her dogs on women for sport, strutting through the camp in tailored, perfumed clothes while inmates starved around her. She was only 22. Dorothea Binns at Ravensbrück, Maria Mandel at Auschwitz, the same story. The cruelty was the point, and it was so bureaucratic that it was easy for the guards to detach themselves. Talking about his arrival at Auschwitz, survivor Dr. Martin Foldy said the following. The guard asked, "How old is your son?" At that moment I couldn't lie, and I told him my boy is 12. Then he asked, "Where is mummy?" And I said, "She went to the left." Then he said to my boy, "All right, run, join your mother." I couldn't see my wife anymore, she was swallowed up in the crowd. I couldn't see my son anymore either. But my little daughter had a red coat, and that little red dot getting smaller and smaller. This is how my family disappeared from my life. The Nazis counted the lice they plucked from prisoners' heads. At one camp, Mauthausen, the death ledger records a prisoner being shot every 2 minutes for an hour and a half on the 20th of April. That was Hitler's birthday. The executions were a gift. That bureaucracy demanded thoroughness. The belongings of the murdered were sorted in warehouses where a team of women did nothing all day but squeeze toothpaste tubes. They were checking for hidden jewels. Purposeful cruelty appeared in the camps too, at least according to the perpetrators. In 1943, a Nazi anatomist named August Hirt had 86 Jewish people selected at Auschwitz, measured and shipped to his laboratory in Strasbourg to be made into a skeleton collection. The purpose was to preserve anatomical specimens of the Jewish race because, in Hirt's words, that race was on the point of extinction, and he wanted to gather a collection while there was still time. His colleagues were exterminating people, and his scientific worry was that they might finish before he could catalogue the bodies. The pseudoscience that started from a linguist's footnote became an order to kill people and keep their skeletons. But one last thing to note here. Hirt reduced those 86 people to specimens and numbers. But in 2004, a historian named Hans Joachim Lang cross-referenced those prisoner numbers against camp records and gave every one of them their name back. There's a memorial now at the cemetery where they're buried, with all 86 names on it. It took 60 years, but they got them back. I thought about this as BJ and Setroth hijacked a mech and ransacked the camp, wallowing through glorious cathartic destruction. We might have got here a little quick, but it's still nice to break Belica. I also thought about this as Irene Engel had her face blown off as she tried to stop us. I want to talk about Atlantis. Setroth lays out the situation. His order, Dat Yeshud, is an ancient mystical society. They invent things, strange technologies centuries ahead of what we have now. The Nazis found one of their safekeeps and bastardized what they found. I'll let him explain.
Das Yeshud it's a philosophy. It is a way of understanding God through knowledge. It is based on pure reason, pure rational thought, not supernatural bupkis.
Dat Yeshud's entire philosophy is creating for the sake of creation. Their technology was never intended to be used by anyone for any purpose or reason. They were just made to be made, an attempt by man to commune with the ultimate maker, God. Later, we find a spindly torque that they made, a zany, mystical weapon that is a perfect example of Set's philosophy. The Dat Yeshud didn't make weapons of death like atom bombs or death mechs, they made big balls of steel that shot spikes on wires. It is a weapon so dumb that it is the perfect representation for how they never intended any of this to be weapons. It sits in contrast with Nazism, a fundamentally negative ideology. It paints pictures of golden, blue-eyed utopias with a brush made from alienation. Germans are a brilliant, strong-willed master race, Hitler would cry. Now that I have your attention, let me tell you about the Jews. It's hateful, it's horrible, and it claims to love you. It's fucking weird. Even Death's Head, a man who creates, needs to destroy to facilitate that creation. Look at what he does to dogs. Look at how he harvests brains. He turns men into machines. He takes old tech and warps it into something uglier, cruder, and more industrial. Those machines, the Nazi victory, comes from stolen technology. In this world, the Nazis might have been right about ancient mystical societies, but everything else they got wrong. Dat Yeshud doesn't trace back to the Aryans that List and Rosenberg wrote about. In the New Order, it traces back to the Jews, and later, when we get to the sequel, it all goes back further to the Sumerians, a civilization that even Alfred Rosenberg doesn't try to claim was Germanic. So, how did the Nazis get this so wrong? It goes back to their reasoning. In The Myth of the 20th Century, Rosenberg writes, "The old legends of Atlantis may appear in a new light. It seems far from impossible that in areas over which the Atlantic waves roll and giant icebergs float, a flourishing continent once rose above the waters, and upon it, a creative race produced a far-reaching culture, sending its children out into the world as seafarers and warriors. These currents of Atlantic men moved by water in their swan and dragon ships to the Mediterranean and Africa, by land over Central Asia, perhaps even to China, over North Africa to the south of our own continent. A prehistoric Nordic cultural center must be assumed." But why must a Nordic culture be assumed? The Atlantean myth that Rosenberg clings to as the foundation of a lot of his thinking moves backwards. It starts with the myths and legends, the wanderings of Plato that led to fictional bedtime stories, and then Rosenberg grafts imagined migration and historic impacts onto them. It's important to remember that, again, the book's translator, Thomas Dalton, points out that, quote, "For Rosenberg, his myth is not at all fanciful or fictitious. It is literally true, a guiding reality." To some senior Nazi officials, Atlantis/Thule was a real place. There were disagreements over where it might be, but Anna Nerb's main focus was on finding it. Even though Plato, who originated the idea, thought Atlantis was out past Gibraltar, Nazis didn't find that convenient enough for their myth. Instead, they traced a pseudo-scientific path to the North Atlantic, relying on the evolution of language to get there. This is where Himmler's fascination with Iceland came from. So why does this matter? Well, Set Roth promises to take the Kreisau Circle to a key Dat Yeshud safekeep, their very own Atlantis. And thankfully, we can place it physically in the world because Wolfenstein gives us coordinates. 47.79 degrees north by 30.74 degrees west. Let me just get my Google Maps. Ah, there it is, west of Germany, not to the north near Iceland. It's in the North Atlantic Ocean, but in Wolfenstein's world, the Nazis have been looking in the wrong place the whole time. It's obviously silly to use Wolfenstein's Atlantic safekeep to disprove Nazi thinking. This is a wacky piece of fiction. Machine Games could have put the safekeep anywhere. But that's what makes it a tease rather than an accident. The Nazi Atlantis never had an address. In Rosenberg's words, a Nordic homeland must be assumed, because it was an invention that they used to justify extermination. The Dat Yeshud Vault has exact coordinates. This tiny bit of text is the ultimate punchline for what Wolfenstein is saying. The Nazis went looking for a homeland to prove that they were chosen. Maybe it was out there the whole time. It just was never theirs.
Me. I know what you're thinking, Blasco. No chance. I'm keeping this thing.
You give that to Caroline.
At no point does the game say Dat Yeshud is Jewish, but it pretty heavily implies it. The name is Hebrew for a start. The Star of David sits on the door. Set Roth speaks Yiddish to open it. The specifics of Dat Yeshud's craftsmanship is never explored. We don't go in depth on what kind of metal they used or how this awesome power armor reacts to its wearer. That feels purposeful, a way to make things feel weirder and more supernatural than the game claims they are. Set might say that it's all just science, but Fergus specifically sees magic. He even describes Set as a wizard. How fair is it that Wolfenstein does this? The magical Jew society with an Atlantic vault that partly proves the Nazis correct. Is it all part of the parody, or something a little more clumsy? The critic James Tregenning wrote on Death is a Whale, somewhere in a writers' meeting, somebody on that team was like, hey, what if the Nazis were right about the whole Jewish conspiracy thing? It's a big fucking misstep. It's a really dumb misstep too for a game that's otherwise really intelligent and invested in its themes. But then on the flip side, we have Steve Lubitz, a Jewish games writer who wrote in 2014, Dat Yeshud's remaining technology is instrumental in turning the tide and winning the war. This simple plot decision takes the Jews in this story from being the victim and lets them be the hero, albeit indirectly. It let me be the hero in a way I've never felt before, and it did it all without ever addressing Blazkowicz's background. Let's consider BJ's background. I'm conflicted on BJ's Jewishness, even if it was id Software's original intention. On the one hand, his role is a damning indictment of Nazi rhetoric, and it positions him, as Jacob Geller put it, as one of the few Jewish heroes in gaming. There's a really lovely, albeit floundering, relationship that is built between BJ and Set, where he teaches the not-so-young Blazkowicz Yiddish. He's inadvertently teaching him about a heritage he never got to explore with his mother. On the other hand, BJ's appearance is important. It makes him a man that could flourish in the Reich if he just chose apathy. A non-oppressed person fighting oppression is important and powerful. In the New Order, the Nazis created a world where victims can't fight back anymore, so it falls to men like BJ to step up. This is the only way fascism falls. In universe, he's the cool kid who punches a bully, even though the bully doesn't care about him. However, the new Colossus then makes it textual that, psychologically, BJ is both cool kid and victim. He has to fight back. With Dat Yeshud's weapons and armor, the team now have a U-boat, ancient technology, and some very big stolen Nazi bombs. One problem, however, those Nazi bombs need encryption keys to activate. Looks like we're going to the moon.
The lunar shuttle leaves tonight from the London Nautica. You will need your equipment up there, but you need to check it as luggage. Not allowed in the passenger cabin. You need to keep a low profile.
BJ's atrocious German is both the game's funniest joke and the weakest part of its presentation. He makes it to the moon, going undercover just like he does at the start of The Old Blood, and even lasts a bit longer than he did at Castle Wolfenstein. A whole 6 minutes, that's a new record. He refuses to learn the tongue of the enemy, still believing that Nazism is a uniquely German thing, something beautifully played with in the sequel. But what that means for the player is a lot of the game's glorious environmental design gets undercut. You can't read the various posters, banners, or literature. The wild and weird propaganda gets obscured. The game could do with taking a leaf out of Bioshock's book, where translated text would fade into the UI so we could clearly see what something is saying. The fact BJ doesn't speak German waves this away in world, but it's a thin wave when letters and newspaper clippings do get translated for us. It's generally frustrating because for a game where you're expected to charge through levels guns blazing, there's some really lovely attention to detail if you stop and smell the Edelweiss. The asylum is full of sweet childish drawings that tell us there were once children there. They've all been taken away by the Nazis, victims of Death's Head's experiments. We can find a slide projector detailing their plan to colonize Venus, a decades-long plan to make a floating city in the stars, made habitable by special drones that have been created to scan the planet for life. Super concrete is set up to be infested with mold, sabotaged by Set Roth, but this is really a silly in-universe reason for why we can shoot through it and blow it to pieces with just an assault rifle. This stuff makes the world feel lived in so we can appreciate the grand scale of their conquest and how terrifying it is to live in a world where they've won. While Joseph Goebbels has been hard at work plastering posters in every room, Rosenberg gets a nod too. Famously, the two men were bitter rivals when it came to Germanic art and culture, but where they came together was how hostile they were toward many forms of art that could be read as another example of the Jewish conspiracy. One of Rosenberg's first acts on achieving power was to demand that all true art focus solely on the Germanic people, a sense of community, and specifically rural life. In The Myth of the 20th Century, he wrote, "Art for art's sake does not exist, has never existed, and will never exist. Art is always the creation of a specific blood, and the form-linked nature of an art will only truly be comprehensible to those of the same blood. To others, it will say little or nothing at all." I don't know though, by Rosenberg standards I should be lapping this up, and I'm getting nothing from the constant paintings of goats, woods and farms. We can only appreciate vastness if the detail holds up. The Nazi moonbase is breathtaking because it's ridiculous and full of spectacle, but also because we learned so much about it at the London Nautica Museum. That prior knowledge does not change how BJ feels.
Lepkovich, can you hear me? What's your status?
Well, I'm on the motherfucking moon.
One area where Wolfenstein pulls away from Alfred Rosenberg's vision of Nazism is in, of all things, urban planning. It was one of his passions, and sure, everyone needs a hobby. He believed unrestricted freedom of movement was a coercive dogma that was thoroughly un-German. He also didn't believe in capital cities. Restrictions have to be made in order to overcome the folk-murdering capital city, he wrote. Efforts must be made to abolish the big city in itself, in order to divide Germany up into small cities and towns. Wolfenstein pulls from one of its biggest inspirations, The Man in the High Castle, to give us a world where Berlin isn't just a capital city, but the capital city. The world's power is now concentrated in one place. Structurally, the game returns to Berlin repeatedly to place importance on it. They might have expanded to the stars, but Berlin is still the heart of the Nazi Empire. We don't see any evidence that the Nazis are embracing a Volkish infrastructure because fascism at its core cannot do that. Philosophically, power must be concentrated at the top, and the living conditions of a country are in service of that. There's no comfort in the world design, but there is lavishness. Each environment is full of juxtaposition. The train to Berlin is decadent and polished, but the lighting is sharp and a massive mech stomps around the common area. Nazi architecture is thick, ugly, geometric, and clumpy. The London Nautica is dedicated to a scientific marvel, people living on the moon, but the exhibits we blast through don't feel welcoming, curious, or wondrous. Instead, they are all about the Nazis. Human ingenuity is specified as Nazi ingenuity. It's propaganda, not a tourist destination. The game's muted color palette simultaneously makes the world feel oppressive while also helping us stomach its brutal bits. That is specifically true with Camp Belica, but we see the principle everywhere. The game has gorgeous art direction that constantly contrasts bleary greys with shocking varied reds. Red trees sit in the camp, red rugs and wallpaper cover rooms in the complexes. The lunar base has blinding red lighting that bounce off the metal of its walls. It stops the spaces feeling dull while using color to reinforce what a Nazi future would look like. Grey and blunt, with constant reminders of shocking, bloody violence. The cars are shitty. The famous London buses have been redesigned to be unnecessarily bulbous. The world is a techno-apocalypse, but they still use vinyls for music. Death's Head isn't interested in furthering art or creativity, just the war machine. Wolfenstein isn't interested in finding ways where the Nazis might have improved the world. A smart decision. Any positive impact the Nazis might have is stained by their core ideology. There's no point painting your bathroom gold if the pipes are leaking shit.
I remember this moment. Back in the camp.
As BJ plans to cross the surface of the moon and find the encryption key, he finds a scalpel and cuts out his prisoner number from Belica. As he does, he flashes back to a chat he had with Set Roth when they were planning their breakout. "If God is testing us," Set said, "we are failing gloriously." If Guido von List was here, he would disagree. Wolfenstein's Nazis are, in fact, in touching distance of God here. Building off Blavatsky's work, he claimed, "The moon is older than the Earth and is its father. The moon shrank up, became smaller and weaker, and gave over its living spirits to the Earth. The moon had a population spiritually far superior to that of the Earth. This population transplanted to Earth in the form of humanity, which explains the spiritual ascendancy of terrestrial humanity descended from lunar ancestors, compared to those who spiritually belong to the Earth and who have by and by evolved as the highest living beings of the animal kingdom. Just so there isn't any doubt, he's separating Aryans from other human beings there by claiming Aryans came from the moon. How did he conclude something so weird, you might ask? Don't worry, he explains. The god Manus is the progenitor of humanity, he wrote. However, in his name is a code word. Man equals man and moon. Us equals out of, i.e. the man from the moon, or our lunar ancestors. Obviously, it comes back to linguistics again. I can't see you, this was recorded months ago, but you don't look convinced. The moon is important to Wolfenstein, not just because it metatextually links to the Nazi belief that Aryans came from the moon, but because as a setting, it's Nazism's cosmic grandiosity made literal. Eternal expansion, 1,000-year Reich. What does complete total fascist victory look like? Death's Head claims that he's seeking perfection. That search is inevitably eternal. They will never be happy and they will never stop, even if they have to look to the stars. Nazis need conquest. It's the only purpose they give their followers. Blazkowicz is awestruck by his time on the moon, but ultimately, this is just a mission to him. He finds the decryption keys for the big bomb and steals a shuttle, preparing to land back in London and rendezvous with Klaus. It's a long journey, which means we've got plenty of time to talk level design. Let's be clear about how a Wolfenstein level actually works, because it's smarter than it first looks. You move along a relatively linear spine with optional dead-end rooms hanging off it, tucked away with collectibles. Then, every so often, that spine widens into an arena, a proper sandbox, with vents to sneak through, side corridors, balconies, and room to breathe. Then it narrows again, and you're back on the spine. Rinse, repeat. That rhythm is why the game stays fresh across a dozen plus hours. The spine keeps the pacing tight, the arenas open up and let you cook. The openness is tactical, not navigational. The branching lives inside the arenas, and it's about how you take a fight rather than where you go next. The commander system that we talked about earlier makes those arenas mean something. Without that threat of reinforcement, the vents and side routes would just be scenery and you would charge straight through. With it, the room becomes a problem to solve, and a reason to actually use the space that Machine Games built. But if you step off the arena floor, the cracks start to show. Traversal is stiff and arbitrary. BJ dual wields assault rifles and kicks robots to death, but some chest-high walls stop him cold, and he'll bump uselessly into cover while soldiers fill him with lead. That word "some" is important. It's inconsistent. Sometimes we can clamber, sometimes we can hop, and sometimes, inexplicably, we just can't. There are too many moments where he feels clumsy and lethargic. The destruction is a bigger letdown because the whole world is sold on destructibility and then quietly whitelists it. The laser cutter slices fences and chains that the level wants you to open, but shoot a steel container mid-firefight and there's not a scratch on it. A whole layer of interactivity is absent too. No cameras to shoot out, no fuse boxes to kill the lights. For a power fantasy about tearing the Reich apart, there's startlingly little of the environment that you can actually touch. And I get it, this is a first-person shooter, not an immersive sim. I'm asking for the game to dip into being something that it isn't, but I also think that the level design teases immersive sim-isms without committing. And I think Machine Games can go further. The hacking and lockpicking minigames, for example, add variety, but they're exclusively for unlocking collectibles, not messing with the world in deliberate and optional ways. Mercifully, the gold, diaries, vinyls, enigma codes, or upgrades aren't lying around in breakable crates. If they were, I reckon my playtime would be double the length, and I'm already examining rural art for the themes. The gold especially is a Wolfenstein staple, but they're not bars like the old days, now they're items, both ancient and banal. Chalices, helmets. There's a joy to realizing you're in a part of the level that's got a custom, weird little puzzle for you to crack. Take here in Death's Head's compound. If you translate the numbers on the wall and pull the levers in the right order, you get a silencer for the handgun. We're gonna need something a little bigger for our next set piece. BJ lands in London. Klaus and co. are on the way, but the Nazis find his location and send their superweapon, the London Monitor. A huge, mechanical behemoth. It's the worst kind of boss fight, the kind the game has spent hours teaching you not to want. It isn't hard so much as tedious, and my biggest complaint in a game that I really love. The whole appeal of Wolfenstein's combat is improvisation. Read the room, try strategy, make a mess your own way. The London Monitor throws all of that out for a rigid, deterministic loop. Wait for the eye to charge up so you can stun it. Wait for the missile pods to open so you can do some damage. Wait while your laser gun recharges. Wait. It was created by the Nazis through necessity. It was the only way they could beat back the resistance movement that brewed in London. The city succumbed in 1951, but the people kept fighting, even after the government gave in. How true would that be today? And more importantly, how equipped is today's satire to deal with fascism?
It's agony to dream like this. Wake up to reality. Sometimes, truly, it's good to remember what you're fighting for.
When it comes to Wolfenstein's tone, we've got to remember how excellent BJ's poetic voice is first. As we ramp up to the finale, he dreams of a world beyond the Nazis. A white picket fence. Anya. His slow, calming thoughts are smashed apart by a frenetic, holistic structure, especially in the game's second half. We go from rhythmically doing operations for the Kreisau Circle to a whole sequence of bombastic chaos that doesn't stop for breath. Attack a train station, steal a U-boat, find the ancient vault, blow up a bridge, whoops, now we're off to the moon, back to London for a boss fight, and now, as we catch up with our hero, that bombastic tone shifts to something more sober. The Kreisau Circle's headquarters are on fire. While we were seeing the stars, Frau Engel led a siege and captured our friends. Setroth, Anya, and Bombati are dragged off to Death's Head's compound. Klaus is shot immediately. It's a death that doesn't serve a clean, redemptive arc. He doesn't take a bullet for someone, you'd expect Max House. He doesn't make a bold sacrifice, he's just caught by a stray bullet as we drive into Berlin. The banality is the tragedy. He's an ex-Nazi. He's the one member of the Kreisau Circle who needed his death to mean something. Importantly, not a single death in the New Order is treated as a joke, even when it comes to our villains. The game is funny, it's pulpy, it plays with a satirical tone, but just like when it takes us to a concentration camp, it finds a home in sincerity. To take the words right out of Jens Mattis's mouth, he told PC Gamer N, "We are making a game about Nazis and Nazi ideology. Those are central themes in the game. You can cartoonify that and try to sidestep it, but we decided early on that that's not what we're going to do." He was talking about this game's sequel, The New Colossus, there, but the point still stands, and all the evidence you need lies with the other two deaths that happened here.
How do you arrive? Everything in accordance with the numbers. This day, the number of consequence is 19. A prime, why not? For the math to square, each and every one on our side must defeat 19 on theirs.
Tekla dies taking 19 Nazis with her and happy that she finally made a real friend in BJ. He taught her how to fire a weapon. She used that to thin the horde. Her death isn't given logistical meaning, but it is given spiritual meaning. An act of defiance by killing so many, as well as an act of connection by using what BJ taught her. In the Wyatt timeline, Jimmy goes out in pure pulp glory, shredding the Star-Spangled Banner on an electric guitar. Even in this awful alternate reality, our fictional Hendrix gets to live out his real counterpart's most famous moment.
This moment, right now, it's gonna be loud.
His is the most glorious death. Comedy and tragedy are fused because the Nazis are so uncultured that they mistake his guitar for a weapon and panic fire. There's bitter joy here as Jimmy goes out in a blaze of glory, but the game's tone remains intact for two reasons. The first is he's not the butt of the joke, the Nazis are. The second is that, crucially, the game's tonal whiplash always cuts the same direction. From joke to gut punch, never the other way around. We see this everywhere. Earlier, there's a great beat where BJ and Anya shag in a closet in headquarters. Klaus rants about how loud they're being as pictures fall from the walls. That's funny, but then we smash cut to the intimacy of the moment. "I want this with you. Always," BJ tells Anya. Comedy feeds straight into sincerity. Hell, Wolfenstein is a pulpy, cathartic, bloodthirsty game that ends with a cover of I Believe by Melissa Hollick, a minimal, melodic ballad about longing for the future. The jokes aren't a driving part of the narrative, they just punctuate it through character beats, asides, and world-building details. The Beatles are here, renamed to Die Kaffir. Wolfenstein implies that they sold out to the Nazis and became a tool for their propaganda. This is something that Liverpool politician and claymation character Steve Rotherham hated, condemning the game by saying, "Hitler and his evil philosophy is not something that should be championed for money-making purposes, and certainly isn't something that should be associated with Liverpool's most famous sons. In my opinion, it is abhorrent that game makers are using any form of Nazi connotation in the production of their computer games." It's silly, and while Rotherham is obviously being quite precious about the Fab Four, he wasn't alone in his discomfort. The mockery of Nazis is core to Wolfenstein's identity. We laugh with our heroes and laugh at the enemy. Literal grammar Nazis in the old blood, a dating advert written by a Nazi on the moon. Nazis stuck in an elevator talking about how ludicrous it would be if 4 safety locks broke at the same time. Moments before we shoot those safety locks and send them to their death. I'm reminded of a letter we can find by a Nazi soldier talking about the horrors of war that he's witnessed. It starts out humanizing him and ends with him talking about how great the master race is. What first seems like the game saying, "Hey, they were just following orders," quickly changes tact. No, Wolfenstein reminds us, these aren't just enemy soldiers, they're goddamn Nazis. Don't feel bad for them. And I believe that approaching Nazism this way is important. Mockery denies fascism the one thing it needs, to be taken seriously on its own terms. As we've discussed, Nazism is built on myths and misunderstandings. Atlantis, ghosts, moon people, and the 1,000-year Reich. It demands you take these weird concepts seriously. Ridicule is corrosive to all of that. This is why authoritarian regimes react with such hostility to someone who mocks the leader. A dictator can survive being hated. Hatred grants him stature. You can't hate something unimportant. But he struggles to survive being absurd. Map dowsing, shagging in graveyards, none of that can coexist with the regime's self-image as the rational vanguard of history. The Allies understood this during the war. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator, Disney's Der Führer's Face. Fascism recruits partly through the seduction of strength, belonging, and grandeur. It's why, once you peel back their bravado, most dictators are kinda losers. Stalin was self-conscious about his looks, so had ordered photographs of himself to be airbrushed. Kim Jong-il spread rumors that he learned to walk at just 3 weeks old. Mockery makes the movement look like something a person would be embarrassed to join. It converts powerful into pathetic. The figure of the Nazi is a strutting, insecure, fundamentally ridiculous man. Like Chaplin's dictator or Wolfenstein's Bond villains, deflates the aura that recruitment depends on. But of course, there's a danger to this. Nazis are ridiculous can slide into Nazis are harmless, which is exactly the complacency that lets it recur. Wolfenstein sidesteps that in a couple of ways.
Welcome back to Berlin, Blaskovich. Connection Robin uses a helicopter. Maybe you can do something about this Nazi problems here.
It's not just that Nazis are mocked, it's that their counterparts are cool. The Resistance is cool. Their funky acoustic soundtrack is catchier than the dirging metal frenzy that's given to the Nazis. BJ himself is one of the coolest goddamn characters in video games. Engel and Death's Head can't compete. Caroline is relegated to a wheelchair, but her mind, her charisma, and her ability to keep the team together is awe-inspiring. And to hammer the point home, she even gets the Dat You Should power armor that lets her be physically cool by doing flips and kicks. The other ways Wolfenstein sidesteps this is A, by framing itself as somber when it needs to be, Camp Belica is the prime example, and B, using real-life figures as inspiration to frame the real-life horrors of the regime. So, as we gear up for one final mission, let's finally talk about the game's cruelest monster.
Call me Death's Head. I don't like it. I'm a happy man. You see? It doesn't sound right in English. Say it correctly.
Let's go back to that interview from Digital Trends. In it, Jens Mattis said, "The core of Death's Head's essence is really that he is right where he wants to be in life. He has attained some sort of Zen-like happiness. The game comes full circle. We start and end with a castle, Death's Head's fortress. The plan is to break in, save our friends, and escape before the U-boat we stole blows it all to hell. Is this a mission to save the world, or is BJ fueled by pure revenge? Why can't it be both?" the game asks. Wilhelm Strass, Death's Head, waits at the top. Like Mattis said, he's a happy man. The name doesn't sound right in English. Say it correctly. Totenkopf. The game doesn't dignify him. BJ calls him Death's Head, so we will too. I wonder what Death's Head and Hitler's relationship is like in the Wolfenstein universe. If Hitler's on the throne, Death's Head is the man behind the curtain, gifting the Reich with machines that let them win the war. Does Hitler see Death's Head as a threat? Does Death's Head care what Hitler thinks of him? As BJ climbs his castle, he rants and rambles. He claims to have heralded a new age of reason. He says he's the man who built civilization. While he only physically shows up at the start and end of the game, his presence has been felt because of how powerful he's become in Wolfenstein's new reality. Eisenwald Prison is part of his experiments. The London Nautica is his museum. The moon was his passion project. Everything we've done has been in service to stopping him specifically, not just the Nazis. His ego is too great to be contained by the Reich. I get the sense he doesn't worship Hitler the same way other senior leaders do. The Führer is just a convenient way for him to realize his dreams. He believes in the Nazi project, he rants about Jews and degenerates just like the rest of them, and he's poured every effort into engineering a new race. Of course, his new race is more machine than man. That's probably for the best, because deep in his lab, BJ is ambushed by Hans Booby Winkle, Frau Engel's boyfriend. He's a weedy rat of a man, shown by how he scuttles through the vents to get at us. Death's Head's philosophy puts Booby at the top of the food chain. He's blonde, blue-eyed, an Aryan. BJ once again proves him wrong.
This woman is my life, you understand? My everything.
He injects us with enough toxin to take down an elephant, claims that because the toxin doesn't work on BJ, there must be something wrong with his cerebral cortex. Don't you get it, Booby? He's the Ubermensch. Bitch. Engel isn't here, but from a screen she sees us murder her toy boy. She took people we love and we've repaid the favor. Brutal, uncompromising willpower. Compassion, Death's Head says from a tannoy minutes before BJ saves his friends. Something not fit for the master race. So what is Death's Head's reading of the master race? It warps Alfred Rosenberg's to be something quite new. Rosenberg didn't just believe in the Atlantean origin of the Aryans, he was also firmly committed to the creation of a new human type. He believed it was the duty of the human race to evolve to a level where it would be able to live on a non-material plane of existence. Death's Head agrees, but he's a transhumanist. He's interested in brains and consciousness, not evolution. It's why he's so proud of his machine men. Rudolf Höss, an Auschwitz commandant, said after the war, "The Führer and Himmler became our conscience. We lost our personal moral self-determination." Stripping away the self was key for Nazi leadership. It had to be sacrificed because the belief was that it would lead psychologically to the development of the new man. Totenkopf might share a name with the ring that Himmler's occultist made for SS officers, but he famously has never been interested in the supernatural in this series. He scoffs at the mysticism, even when Return to Castle Wolfenstein gave him a literal resurrection project. He speaks the language of science, not superstition and myth. It's why his transformation into a full-blown mad scientist that's all about the robots feels like an inevitable conclusion in 1960. But the way the game characterizes him is full of disturbing reminders of Joseph Mengele, the Nazi angel of death. Mengele was a doctor who arrived at Auschwitz in 1943 and discovered a place that would let him do absolutely anything. That's the first thing he shares with Death's Head: the credentials, the intellect, the self-image of a scientist rather than a murderer. His obsession was twins. Most of his victims were children. He'd measure them for days and then killed paired twins on the same night, purely so the two bodies could be autopsied side by side while still warm. If one twin died of disease, he had the other killed to match them. Eyes are one of the things that link the fictional man to the real one. At the start of the game, Deathshead leans over to Wyatt, murmurs that he likes his eyes. Mengele was fixated on eye color. He injected dye and adrenaline directly into the eyes of his victims to try and turn them blue. When he found prisoners with heterochromia, he had them killed and their eyes cut out, mailed to a colleague in Berlin for study. Much of what we know about Mengele comes from three sources. Miklos Niesli, a prisoner who was forced to perform Mengele's autopsies, Eva Moses Kor, a twin who survived his experiments, and Vera Alexander, a prisoner who was forced to look after the children that he hurt. At the 1961 Jerusalem trials, Alexander said, "One pair of twins was called Guido and Nina. Mengele sewed them together at the back, like Siamese twins." If mocking the Nazis is important, so is learning and understanding what they did. Evil is real, like concrete. The details matter, especially if they're horrifying. I'm not telling you these specifics to exploit that horror. I'm telling you because, especially in an age where people replace the word suicide with unalive to appease an algorithm, Nazi ideology should never, ever be sanitized. While Wolfenstein doesn't give that sort of cruelty to Deathshead, it does imply that he wouldn't have a problem with it. Just look at what he does to our friend.
I savor his memory. Do you remember him?
Depending on our choice at the start of the game, either Fergus or Wyatt has their brain harvested by Deathshead and is ultimately turned into a mech. He claims it's for science, but it feels personal and vindictive. Even now, with BJ at the door, Strass decides to turn this into an opportunity for an experiment. It's a quick and dirty fight, a couple of grenades, no weapons. It's tragic and treated as a heartbreaking kindness when the dust finally settles. Irrespective of the timeline, both Fergus and Wyatt ask BJ to kill them. The biggest thing that separates Deathshead from Mengele is the game's monster is actually brought to justice. Mengele fled to Argentina and died of a stroke decades later. He never stood trial. Wolfenstein, being the cathartic, pulpy video game that it is, lets us massacre Deathshead. It's a two-phase battle that's strategic. The first phase has us avoiding him and using the artillery guns to blow up the zeppelins that power his electromagnetic field. Phase 2 throws us into the basement of his complex, a furious, smoke-filled fight to the death where he hunts us. It's an exhausting end, and the best boss in the whole series, regardless of the era. BJ doesn't get to walk away from this. His enemy has one final petty trick, a grenade that blows us both up. Wounded and unable to escape the fortress, he tells his friends to bomb the compound with him still inside. The man who spent the whole game refusing to die finally chooses to.
Glasgow, do you read? Am I clear to fire?
You're clear.
The poet gets the final word, not the maniac. He sees Anya and reaches for her, seeing her like liberty. The dreamer wins out over the killer one last time, and it's powerful because Machine Games dedicated so much time and precision to letting us live in his head. We don't see the bomb hit him, a classic, uncertain setup that the sequel runs with, but after 15 hours of catharsis, the game denies us a clean victory lap. So, Nazis are weird. We've been to a universe made of ice and a sunken Atlantis in the wrong place. We've met a man who talked to ghosts and an occultist who built a master race out of a linguistic misunderstanding. None of it was exaggerated for this video. The exaggeration was already there, baked into the regime, dressed up as science. The Nazis were stranger than any fiction, which is probably why Wolfenstein's version of them endures. Carl Williget and the Annenerb and the broken telephone of the race soul are interesting in their own right, but Wolfenstein The New Order serves as an ostentatious jumping-off point. It's great because the shooting is glorious and the world design is captivating. It's great because it gave us the new and improved BJ Blazkowicz, a poet with blood in his teeth who is somehow the funniest and most tender protagonist of his decade. It's great because it knows when to make you laugh at a Nazi stuck in an elevator and when to go completely silent at the horror. It mocks the grandeur and honors the dead. Very few things pull that balance off. Wolfenstein takes the single most serious subject there is, wraps it in robot dogs and dual-wielded shotguns, and uses all of that pulp to smuggle in something true. You come for the catharsis of killing Nazis. You leave with a taste of who Joseph Mengele was. The Weird Reich in this game rewrote the world. New flags, new history, a new order. Monsters who harvest brains, steal children, claim a lunar ancestry, and exploit mystical secrets trapped in the world. Himmler, Rosenberg, Mengele, Death's Head, Engel, Schabs, Jaeger. They answer to something cosmic in its terror. But, like BJ says, each of them will always be just another Nazi. And Nazis are really fucking weird.